Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special edition of Beyond the Album Cover where we get to know the inside of the music industry with those in the know, and we give them their flowers while they're here to be celebrated. I have with me on the line right now a member of the 90s R&B group Shy, who I've been a fan of over the years, and over time I have become a great friend to this man. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only Mr. Mark Gay. Mark, thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Oh, real. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be in your presence. I know you've been working on different things and avenues for doing shows for years. And I'm glad that we talk junk about sports and music and everything on a daily basis. So now it's a good format to be able to put it on Zoom now and actually record it and talk to you and just light it up.
Yeah, man, it's definitely been a pleasure having your friendship over the years, and you've played a big part in my wife and I's lives with putting us in touch with Angela and Damon. They did our
Oh, yeah.
premarital counseling, so definitely gotta thank you for that, and shout out to Angela Garcia Shelby and Damon Shelby. If you are in the Albuquerque area, go to God's House Church, located on Wyoming Boulevard in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yes, I'm definitely plugging. Nothing wrong with plugging for
That's right.
Jesus. Amen. So definitely go to God's house, get a good word spiritually, and good people, great times, great worship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great people.
Yeah, and I find this quite interesting, me interviewing you, because I had a chance to interview Carl Groove. So it's interesting to hear your take on things about Shy and everything that's going on. And I see you repping the HU like always. Yep. You
Always.
guys are on fire right now with Biden's #2 pick. So I know the pretty girls and pearls are going nuts right now.
The whole campus is going nuts. And then on top of that, my daughter goes to Howard. So she actually worked part of the campaign last fall. So she was going on the train from from DC to Baltimore to she did some artwork for the mural work of Kamala Harris's campaign, who is our senator in the state of California. So my daughter's grown up with her and she's just over elated with everything that's going on. Even through the pandemic, she's home now, but when she goes back to Howard, they're going to lose their minds all year long.
Yeah, so no homecoming this year, but it'll feel like homecoming. And for those of you that don't know what the Pretty Girls and Pearls are, that's the sorority of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Shout out to the AKAs. I also want to shout out Deltas, Zetas, Sigma Gamma Rhos, and also the fraternities Alpha Phi Alpha, Phi Beta Sigma, Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi, and Iota Phi Theta. We got to shout them out, even though there's not a lot of them repping.
Gotta get everybody in. Gotta get everybody. D9 is really important, and it's going to be a big campaign coming up with all the organizations working together, working with other organizations as well to make sure that we could, make that push for the office in November. So we're supporting everybody. No votes left behind. We're going to put it all on the line because we have to. We have to. There's too much stuff going on. We have to make sure that we do the right thing at this point.
Right. Make sure you exercise your ballot at the ballot box. November, vote, request your absentee ballot, know your state laws for voter registration. And if you feel that you have been intimidated, there's numbers that you can call to make sure that your rights have not been violated. So let's do all that we can to make sure our vote is heard come November and get the current occupant out of office. But that's neither here nor there. So let's go ahead and let's get it cracking. You were born and raised in the 305 Miami. So how growing up in Miami influenced you musically with all the different sounds coming out there, from the Latin salsa to Uncle Luke and everything else in between?
Miami was a different environment because you grew up with a lot of diversity, and the Latin influence comes into play in certain areas, but Miami also has other areas that are segregated from most of the Latin communities. So you have Liberty City, Alapata, Carroll City, and all those areas not versus, but Hialeah, Calle Ocho, and then it's just a real diverse community, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans. So there's so much knowledge of music to soak in your environment that I think I was just taking all of those in. And when growing up, the Black Station was a little a little smaller than it is now because we didn't have the New York influence that we do now. So WEDR was the radio station that I grew up on, and 99 Jams now, and they played all of the music that I grew up on, and they didn't really play Luke as much. Luke was part of the South Miami DJs when I was going to the skating rinks when I was young with my brother, and they came through the ranks and they just put on shows at the skating rink, and then it got bigger and bigger, turned into Two Live Crew and most of that. So by the time I got to high school, it just kind of blew up before the controversies and everything else. But between having the base of that, the Hispanic influence of dance music, um, all of that, it just really influenced the whole culture. You add gospel to that because, you know, it's a strong gospel background impulse as well. You put all that together and you just have a gumbo of music in Miami that, you know, needed to come out, needed to explode. And in some kind of way over the years, it just got bigger and bigger and it's transformed into a more musical locale where people want to go develop their music now. And it's definitely grown a lot since the 90s, the early 90s.
Yeah, so you were a part of those early Pac Jam shows with Uncle Luke and the Toilet Bowl, and then Captain D coming and all of
Yeah,
the stuff. This was before WAP, the original WAP.
that was before all of that. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So
And I also want to mention we lost an icon in Southern Soul, Miami, born and bred, Betty Wright. May she
I,
rest in peace. I didn't
yeah,
know about Deep City Records until there was a documentary on PBS, and they were
mhm,
talking about how she cut her first record with them at the age, I believe, 14.
yeah,
She was discovered at a local record store picking up a record that she won on in a contest,
mhm.
and that led her to sign to Deep City. But I didn't realize that Miami, that little pocket of that region had such a big soul sound with that one little label. And it was just amazing how just now I was just finding out about it.
Yeah, and there was a group, I can't remember the name right now, but it was Marcus Cooper's dad, and it was his. There was a song that they had on the All I Need Is One More Chance, and it was a three-member group, and they sang that song, and I grew up on that between that and the Betty Wright and everything else, and then that just it made me remember a lot of music. So Wesley, you have to hold on right now. So that having that aspect of listening to music on the radio station, having the local input, and just knowing that a local group could get on the radio station and actually perform and do local stuff and have it get to a certain point in the region, let you know that if you put in the work, it was going to make sense. But Miami was all about supporting Betty Wright. I mean, you heard her songs every night. There was a slow jam section, and you heard her music, and it just got really into the crux of your soul and made it work.
And then also we have TK Records, which put out KC and the
Yeah,
Sunshine Band.
yeah.
And once they exploded, it was everybody was taking a look at what was going down in Miami. And then that later paved the way for what was to come with Gloria Estefan.
Yes, yeah, and they and Gloria established their own entity and their record company and the Latin Explosion, and that just opened a whole bunch of doors for everybody else to come behind them, and they pretty much managed all of the artists after them, and that eventually turned into John Cicada, who we actually ended up touring with a lot in the early '90s, and he just blew up, and from there it just went all over the map.
And John Cicada, along with Gloria Estefan, Don Lewis, and countless others, The Rock, were alums of this little school out of Coral Gables. I'm going to put it up.
Got to put up the U. And the thing is that everybody knew the School of Music at the University of Miami is one of the best in town. And my high school choir, I went to Miami Killian Senior High, and we used to always go to the University of Miami to do, like, there were always choral performances, choral, not testing, but they actually had contests over there. So the big thing to do was to go to University of Miami and to perform. So we knew that school brought out a whole bunch of Manhattan Transfer was over there as well. So they did a lot of work over at University of Miami. So we heard a lot of good music in the area.
Now, also at this time, the football team was starting to come into dominance, with Coach Snellenberger. Then after he left, pre-Dallas Cowboys, Jimmy Johnson, and then when he went to Dallas, you had Dennis Erickson, then Butch Davis, Larry Coker, and to just think about all of the talent that came out of Miami during those years, and I'm sure it really had a big impact on the city and pride that our little town, which wasn't considered a football powerhouse like a Nebraska or USC or Alabama, just got put on the map and was cranking out first rounders year after year after year.
Yeah, we knew we had the talent as far as football and basketball players and baseball players too, because the University of Miami was well known for their baseball program as well. And I even had a couple of friends go through their program and ended up going to minor leagues, and some of them ended up going to the majors as well. So, we knew we had the talent, but it was a matter of being the breakout because there was nothing in Miami at that point but the Miami Dolphins, who we love, but at the same time, we wanted to have more exposure for different sports. So, we just knew it because you go to the park system, you saw the talent. You saw all over the Pee Wee leagues, the high schools, everything else. But you just needed that one championship. And when we beat Nebraska that year, it was all going forward. Go make it happen at that point.
And to quote Ed Reed, they were dominating, and Joaquin said dominate, and we ain't doing it. So Ed Reed, Hall of Famer in Canton, Ray Lewis, Hall of Famer in Canton. We could go down the list of all the University of Miami alums that are in Canton.
With Randall Hill, so you gotta say Randall.
Mr. Run through the tunnels in the Cotton Bowl. It wasn't my fault that he left the tunnel open. It wasn't my fault that Tolbert Bain ran down on the kickoff and knocked my man out. I think that's what made people love and hate Miami is that they had a swagger about them. They didn't care that they were fresh. I mean, what school would show up before a bowl game wearing fatigues?
It didn't work out so well, but it was definitely
the idea
of doing it.
Interception. And I think Miami has not worn fatigue since. I wouldn't wear it.
No. Jimmy's like, let's pull that. That's not going to work.
No. So what led you to want to go to Howard University, knowing that Florida is rich in terms of universities? Like we have Miami, Florida Atlantic, Florida International, University of Florida out of Gainesville, FAMU, Florida State, Bethune-Cookman. So what led you wanting to go to Chocolate City, aka DC?
Well, I think I grew up around a lot of historically Black colleges, and I grew up with the Orange Blossom Classic, which meant that FAMU was going to perform in their band every year. Once every year, they would do the game down in Miami. And so one of the beauties of being able to see the game and the band was that I think in '77, they brought down Doug Williams and the Grambling Tigers, and I saw HBCU play football at a level that I had never seen before. And you knew Doug was going to make the pros, and he eventually went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but you didn't know that college football was going to be on the brink of going to that level. And FAMU actually had a very good team as well. So being around that, my parents went to a Tuskegee Institute at the time, and it became Tuskegee University. And then my brother went there as well. So I was going to homecomings at Tuskegee every year in the fall. And I knew that was a place I could potentially go, but there was this thing tagging in my head saying, why don't you go to Howard? Why don't you go to Howard? It could be a good school for you. They have a med school. At the time I wanted to become a doctor, and it kept tugging at me. And then the Alphas had a convention in '86. So I happened to go to the convention. We went over to campus, and there was nobody on the yard. I mean, nobody on the yard. It was a summer day, and I just went over there with my parents, and I stood in the middle of the yard, and I said, this feels like home. This feels like home. And that became the place I wanted to go. And then I put in the application. Everything went through, got accepted by the next fall. And once I got to Howard, it was a totally different thing than what I even imagined. There's so much more. So by the time I got there, I was like, oh, this is even beyond. And I happened to meet my best friend, Jamal Johnson, the first week of school. I met people who my parents knew their kids, their parents, and their kids were coming to Howard too. So between that, I mean, it was just a great decision, one of the best decisions I've ever made, besides, finding my wife. And then, because that decision led to me finding these people in my life that everything I would do would lead to these great decisions. So if I didn't go to Howard, I don't know where my life would. It would have led somewhere really, really, really good, but at the same time, it wouldn't be what it is now. And that one decision made a big difference in my life.
Right. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the legacy of HBCUs, Howard is considered one of the premier HBCUs in the country. Generations of students have gone there, have matriculated to go into various professions. Now, you mentioned that your parents went to Tuskegee. Were they there around the same time Lionel Richie and the Commodores were students there?
They were there before. So they actually knew them. They knew the Commodores actually at an early point before they even grew up. And one little tidbit, my dad was in a group called the Collegians. So he was actually in a singing group during the time that he was in school. And I didn't know this stuff until like way later in life. So I never knew. And then I saw the pictures. I was like, wow. And so when I finally told my mom that I was in a singing group called Shy, she was like, well, I have a picture for you and I'm going to show it to you. And I'm looking at a picture of my dad in a 5-person group singing at school. And I was like, wow, this is like really amazing. Never knowing that, because we never talked about it growing up. It's stuff that doesn't come up when you're just talking to your parents.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think anybody thought I would be in a singing group either, but it just led to that path. And so it's kind of amazing that he went to school at Tuskegee, then Lionel Richie. They knew certain people. I think they knew Ronald LaPree. I think they knew him. I think he was the bass player, but they knew of him. And then the group just blew up,
Mm-hmm.
and Tuskegee was on the map at that point.
Now, did you do any singing into prior groups before Shy, like for school talent shows or
I did.
for the
I
Step Out
did.
show?
I did everything I could do, not only at Howard, but high school. I did talent shows. Um, for the church conferences, because my grandfather's a pastor at AME Church growing up. So I would go to every conference I could, and we would always put together a group to do some type of performance. And I really got into music because I learned how to play piano from my uncle, who taught me piano when I was about 12. So after choir rehearsal, I would go over to my grandparents' house and he would teach me piano. And I just kept practicing and practicing. And eventually, by the time I was about 16, 17, started writing music for the first time and started writing those songs. And those songs turned into songs I would perform in the talent shows in high school. And then I was singing in the choir in high school. And from there, just this kept going, kept rolling and rolling. And I was really with some really talented people in high school where they were writing. They were, the leader of the marching band, Cal Roberts. He's passed away, but this guy was so talented. I mean, he inspired me to do way more because he played all the church chorus, and it was amazing. I couldn't play those chords like he could at the time. So I was just learning from him. He was learning from me, and we were just putting it together. And by the time we came to our graduation, we wrote a song for graduation. And we performed it. We were switching off, playing piano parts, and it was just pretty amazing to be part of a legacy like that at Killian.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned your high school has a legacy as far as for music. How are they athletic wise? Were they up to the same par as Miami Northwestern as far as football?
For the most part, I mean, Northwestern started winning, I think, a little bit more once we left. But my program, they got a lot of kids into college, and like I said, Randall Hill was part of that program. But they were the number one team as far as state track. They were the fastest guys in the state. So we had a whole bunch of talent at the school, and on the football field, we might not have put it together when we were there, but they ended up winning a state championship later on, like maybe like 10 years after we left. So there was definitely talent at the school. Our rival was Southridge and Palmetto, where my dad actually taught at. So those rivals just kept, I mean, these guys, we would compete with them in everything, every sport. it was Southridge, Palmetto, Killian, Southridge, Palmetto, Killian, Southridge, and then of course we'll meet the other teams, Northwestern, Carroll City, Miami High, and some other schools. We would meet them along the way just to get to the point where we could get to state. But in basketball, it was a whole different thing too. And Miami High was one of the premier programs as far as state basketball program. So you had to get through Miami High to get to state at that point.
Now, is there a difference as far as the regional styles in Florida, like the South Florida, Miami, Central Florida, Orlando, Tampa, and Northern Florida, Tallahassee, Gainesville, then Pensacola? Is there a difference between those three parts of the state in terms of living
They're very different. As far as the athleticism, no. As far as I think just us being a bigger city, I think you have to deal with more talent to cut through to become the top dog in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, because you can't leave out Broward County, when dealing with sports. They have one of the top programs now, St. Thomas Aquinas. Their sports program is second to none, and they play all over America now, and they will beat teams from Vegas, Texas, you name it, put them on the they're going to play with them. So between Dade and Broward having that much talent, you knew that you had to train hard as the best talent in the city. But as far as Jacksonville, Tallahassee, their numbers just weren't where we were. But as far as having the talent and being able to go to the schools and mesh well, yeah, they had that too. And they ended up going to Florida State, University of Florida, and now they go to actually the University of Central Florida as well, which is one of the biggest, no, it is the biggest college in the state of Florida now. I think it's at either between 48,000 and 64,000 undergrad. So it's a huge college that all of a sudden just popped up, and then hey, it's here, and it's not going anywhere. The University of Florida, Florida State, they have to deal with University of Central Florida now, as well as University of South Florida as well. So these schools are coming for them.
Yep. That's what sliding some public sandwiches doing that recruiting trip would do for you. That's your selling point. Hey, we got public sandwiches. You don't have a Publix at Murray State. You don't have a Publix at the University of Oregon. We got public sandwiches and we got theme parks, and we can get you an all-season pass. Just don't tell nobody.
Exactly.
Right, but
that story.
Yeah, but Florida's winning right now. I mean, we got Teddy Bridgewater as our starting quarterback, who's a Miami Northwestern alum. And then the cover boy of Madden 21, Lamar Jackson, is from down that area, right?
Yeah, he's from Broward County, I think. I can't remember which school right now, but yeah, he's from the area. And these guys, I mean, you grow up training in that humidity. I mean, you're going to be a certain type of talent. I can't believe they let him go to Louisville, because he really shouldn't have been able to leave the state. But once he got up there, he lit it up, and I'm very, very proud of him. And seeing his journey along the way, hey, every team in the NFL wishes they drafted him now, don't they?
Right, everybody, and I think Teddy will actually do well at Carolina. Although I was sad to see Cam go, but hopefully Papa N will make up the money that he's lost, and Cam be dressing up as the Quaker Oat Man for his press conference up in New England. I hope he enjoys that cold weather.
He's going to be dressing up every day. He got better weather to dress up for the cold. He's going to have the Afghans. He's going to have everything.
While Belichick is going to have his cutoff hoodie and his headset.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's not changing.
Yeah, while Brady and Gronk is going to enjoy Tampa, and Brady probably got an impossible sub at Publix right now.
The Brady sub. I mean, that's just what it's going to be.
Brady sub with nothing but avocado, impossible meat, no bread, and he's having all his offensive linemen eat it with the TB12 juice.
He's going to have it right beside.
Yeah, 12-ounce TB12 juice. Sold at Publix. Yeah, so really now with Shy, was there any other members in the group before Garfield, Darnell, and Carl, or was it just you three? And
the original foundation was actually for a talent show, for the homecoming show, and it was actually, the group was called Spirit. And at that time, Garfield was not a member of that particular group. And there was a guy named Kevin Monroe, who's pretty much a movie executive at this point now, and Kevin Bryan, plus Darnell, Carl, and myself. And we sang Boyz II Men's Please Don't Go. and a couple of other songs. So we sang at the talent show, and Howard is one of those places where if they don't like you, they'll boo you. And we got on stage, and they might have booed a little bit at first, but we sang those notes just well enough to where we got some applause, and it let us know we had something. We didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but we knew it was something. So after that, we kind of kept practicing, and then Kevin knew he couldn't really hang. He was an engineering major. So he knew he couldn't really hang with the practice schedule. And so Darnell and Garfield were actually roommates from freshman year. So Darnell brought Garfield to the table, and then we started singing together. And the first song we actually performed together was If I Ever Fall in Love. So we performed it all over campus for about 6 months. And we kept getting the response like we got from the radio after it got on the radio. But we got that response all over campus, and we sang it everywhere. We would sing it at the drop of a dime, just because we knew we could sing it that well. And man, one of the best experiences ever in life is to be able to sing your song all over and have a response from people saying, we love your song, and this is why I love it. And you guys go forward and make sure you do it.
Right, because I remember interviewing Carl. He had told me that how he got the song on PGC was, I think it was a softball game or something, and
Yeah.
one of the DJs from PGC was playing it, ended up
Paco
slipping the
Lopez.
tape, and
Paco.
then that's where it started getting that buzz around the DMV.
Absolutely. And Paco Lopez is actually in Vegas now, and props to him because he's the one that circulated the song. He had it in DC, but then he pushed it to, I think, Phoenix and Houston. And when it went to these other locations, the song popped as well. So if it wasn't for them getting the song out when nobody even knew what we looked like. There was no picture, no nothing. We had pictures, but when the song was being, transferred around, there was no pictures. Nobody knew what we looked like. They just liked the song, and it kept getting played over and over and over. And at first, we were the ones calling in DC, but then when we stopped calling, we were, because we would go to practice, we couldn't call when we were practicing. But at the same time, we kept hearing it on the radio. And we're like, well, why is it playing on the radio? And we were pleasantly surprised, and it's one of the most gratifying feelings in the world, hearing your song on the radio, especially that first time. You're jumping for joy like 5 heartbeats when everybody heard this song on the radio and the whole family's jumping around. That was us all over DC. So
Right. Now, did it also get airplay in Baltimore on 92Q?
it did eventually. Yeah, not at first. We couldn't, for some reason, we couldn't get it up the road like that. And it's funny how the radio stations kind of work. And it's, I guess, even for back then, it was who's going to make it work, or is there a record company to make it not play, or because there's so many levels of independent promotion that people use, and this song had nothing like that to it. It was just DJs giving it to a DJ, giving it to a DJ, giving it to a DJ, and if you liked it, you played it.
So it was definitely organic.
Yes. Probably one of the more organic songs you'll ever hear of.
And now, for those of you unfamiliar with the DMV, that consists of Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia, which is the heartbeat, the bedrock of a little musical style known as go-go. We have acts such as the Godfather of Go-Go, Chuck Brown, may he rest in peace, EU, Rare Essence, Trouble Funk. And can you tell me about you coming from Miami and then going to DC and hearing go-go for the first time?
Yeah. Oh man. DC is such an interesting place because you would just walk up the street on a Friday night and you're going and you're hearing this music. And you're like, what is that? And I've never heard it. And the girls just start moving and the guys are outside and everybody's doing their original music. And the go-go clubs were really popular at the time. DC was completely dangerous and the murder capital in 1987, 88. But at the same time, they just enjoyed the environment. And I was lucky enough to have one of my good friends, Theodore Cummings, as one of my buddies that I met my freshman year. And he was a senior in high school at Banneker, but he also took classes at Howard. And so I would hear about the go-go clubs from him, and he would go crazy because he's from DC. And so knowing somebody actually from the place and knowing where to go and where to listen to it and how to stay out of trouble, It was a great introduction to the music and the environment. It's so different than what I heard in Miami growing up, but I just took it in and knew that rhythms, and you just try to include it in everything you do.
With Howard being a meshing of students from different areas, not only in the US, but internationally, were
Mhm.
there a lot of mixing of different styles, different genres of music? Like, hey, I brought my stuff from Cali, or I brought my stuff from
Yeah,
Houston, or I brought my Brit
yeah.
soul R&B from the UK, and it was just a cross pollination.
You would hear everything. I mean, you meet somebody from Detroit. The Detroit house music scene was different than the Chicago music scene, which was different than the California rap that came through. I mean, people would get these tapes and they would just play it, and then you're in a dorm full of just music. Like every day, I stayed in Drew Hall my freshman year, and every day you would hear Public Enemy blaring from, just from one of the rooms on the fifth floor. I'm on the second floor, but you just hear this music and BDP and everything else, and Dana Dane, and you just hear different styles and you just soak it all up because everybody's from different places. And of course, I would play my Miami music and they were like, "What's that? That's not going to work." And I was like, "Yeah, it is. Don't you worry about that." So, yeah, I would definitely get into it with a lot of people about Miami sound, but nah, you just take it all in and mesh it all in and you practice. And I wasn't even thinking about producing and songwriting really too much. I was still write a little bit in school, but I was just trying to make sure my grades were staying up to par so I could stay, because there were people leaving after the first year. If Howard was tough, so if you don't keep your grades up, they're gonna kick you out real quick.
Yeah, they give you that look to the left, look to the right. Some of you are not going to be here by spring semester. You're going to be on academic probation, and no, you cannot join XYZ if we don't accept paper either.
No, I know people that tried to get into the fraternity, and they had I think the grade point average was 2.5 at Howard, and they had a 2.48, not getting in, did not get in. 2.49 did not get in, not happening.
Right, because I went to a PWI UNCG, which is right up the street from A&T, but hearing about how at HBCUs, the fraternities and sororities, they are a vital lifebeat of the school. You have legacy members, mom and dad joined this particular organization. Now you're joining. And the yard, for those of you that don't know, is a little area where all of the organizations have their colors and symbols all separated. But
Yeah.
I repeat, listen carefully. If you are not a member, do not, under any circumstances, go to those plots, because you will get questioned really quick. And disclaimer, I am not a member. I know people who are affiliated with these organizations. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, throw that out there. Yeah, I mean, they're definitely designated for the spots, but homecoming is something else because you have people coming back and celebrating with years of people that they've known over the years and going back to the trees and their plots, and it's just a really good time. And the first homecoming, I had never seen anything like it. It was people coming from all over the world, the country, and going to sing songs and play. They had this big board and they played Bob Marley on the screen, and I had never seen anything like it. And everybody was so calm and just having a good time. And there's nothing like homecomings at HBCUs to really enjoy the camaraderie of people you went to school with and enjoy the time. You meet people and you celebrate, being in school at a time when it was just you and those people, and you celebrate every day of seeing them. And then after you leave school, you don't see them the same, but you remember what you did together during the time you were in school. So it is nothing like it.
Right, because I just did an interview recently with Josh Kimbrough, who's an indie artist and who was my first program director at WAG. And I was talking about
Okay.
how, man, it's been over 10 years since I've graduated. But for the Black alumni at my alma mater, we've tried to have our own little HBCU
Okay.
flavor to Fall Fest, where you have your Black alumni party, and then
Yeah.
the members of the fraternities and sororities will all get together and do their thing. And it's different when you're Black and going to a predominantly white institution,
Yeah.
where you want to have that sense like at HBCU, but the grand scheme of things, it's more ahead of a class than a different world.
it's a little different, but you know, everybody makes the choices that they make for a certain reason. And it's kind of funny because a lot of people, after graduate from the PWIs and come to Howard, and they would enjoy it so much because they were like, this is the taste that I couldn't get when I was an undergrad, but now I'm going to get it and I'm going to jump in and do stuff with you guys. Can I be a part of it? And we're like, yeah, come on in. Come on
Right,
down.
yeah, because like I say, A&T is right up the road from my alma mater, so a lot of people from A&T would visit our school and vice versa, and would try to get their homecoming concert tickets at a student discount because they had friends that were at A&T or 45 minutes up the road at Winston-Salem State. Now, with Howard being in close proximity to Georgetown, University of Maryland, Morgan State, Coppin State, was there a lot of mixing with all of the schools at that same time? Like you would go visit each other's campuses, go to games, and then by you being an Alpha Alpha, go to the probate shows for the
Oh, yeah.
Neos.
Yeah, actually, I think when we played, I played in spring '89 at Howard Beta Chapter, and my line actually did stuff because we were all together. So it was a consortium that we actually had sands that were at George Mason, I believe, and Georgetown as well. And so we knew the guys that we were actually going to cross with at the same time. And so after that, we used to go to Maryland. We used to go to Morgan State. I mean, we're familiar with all the chapters in the area. So now we would go hang out. And if there was any trouble between anybody at all, not between the Black fraternities, but if there was anything that popped off, and we were even at Greek picnics at Maryland, if anything popped off, we were all together and we would support each other. It could be the Qs, Kappas, whatever, you know. When we're not messing with each other, I mean, we defend each other against everybody else. So we knew everybody from all over the region. And that's one of the beautiful things about being in DC. You could go out to George Mason, you could go out to UVA, you could go out to Hampton, you could go out to Coppin and all these other schools in Delaware, and went to Delaware State too. So, you know, going to Philly and going and hang out in Philly. I mean, Philly had the track. So, you know, the Philly relays, we would go up there as well. There's so much to do while you're at Howard that as long as you keep your grades together and do everything you want to do. I mean, New York had the Milrose games, so people were going up there too. We had a game every year, a football game that we would go up to the Meadowlands and play a classic up there. So there's so much to do. And then you're in an organization, there's so many more people to meet. They had the Greek picnic in Philly as well, I almost forgot. But that Greek picnic in Philly, there's nothing like it, especially that first one after you know, go over and go up there. And oh man, then I had a friend who actually went over Omega. And so after he went over, I was hanging with him because that's my boy from home. And so he just did 30 years. Congratulations, Tigo, on doing that. 30 years is a long time to be in the frat. And man, I'm just proud of everybody who's been able to hang in there and do great things all over the planet. So yeah, I'm
Right.
really proud of him.
Right. Definitely fraternities, sororities, great organizations, promote mentorship,
Yeah.
academic excellence, and pretty much if you look at anybody that's been successful, they have been associated with these organizations. We just mentioned Kamala Harris. You have Stuart Scott, Donnie Hathaway, Michael Jordan, Stephen A. Smith, Terrence J., Montel Jordan. The list goes on and on of all of different people who are in these various organizations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And once again, I want to throw out, I am not a member. I just know people who are affiliated. So those of you who have colors, don't test me. I am not a member. I am not a member. I repeat, I am not a member.
No, we're trying to get you though. Come on over. Come
Yeah,
on.
you know which one. We'll talk about that off air. You know which one. You know which one. So I find it interesting that with Shy being a vocal group, you mentioned to me how New Edition has had an influence on you guys, and I want to hear how so, because New Edition is more along the lines of the Temptations, Four Tops, where it's more choreo based, while you guys are straight vocal. So I want to hear how New Edition had an influence on Shy.
Well, I think not just their vocals, but their style and how they stay together. As far as their movements, we realized early on that our movements weren't going to be the same. And Fatima Robinson actually did some choreography on us early. And before we did our first homecoming show, she did that show for us. But we figured out early that her style wasn't going to really mesh with our style per se, and we ended up going to Frank Gatson later on after we had become a little bit more developed in our music. And that's by that time we did the grad nights at Disney, and then he did more of our stylings and that kind of thing. And Frank is very unique. He's done In Vogue. He's done a lot of work with Beyonce, and he's very individualistic about how he takes an approach. But I think we were the first guys that he actually worked with like that. And he took pride in making sure that we look big at all times, big on stage, our placement, our movements. It's subtle, classy, but just making sure that we would do the things that could take us to a level of New Edition, that could take us to a level of the Temptations, and still wear the suits and do that. We could dress down and wear the other stuff, but still make our movements big and have the fans really, pay attention to what we were doing.
Right.
But New Edition was so big with that Heartbreak album that there's no way you weren't going to be influenced by that time. If It Is in Love, I mean, that not just the way they sang the song, the harmonies and that kind of thing, and knowing how they stacked the layers with Johnny and Ralph now, after all the stories come out about who did the demos and that kind of thing. I think that's really interesting over the years that Johnny did a lot of the work for that album. And it led us to believe that he was just an add-on when he did a lot of that work. So I think that's funny over time. But yeah, New Edition, no, definitely influenced. I was about 12, I think, Is This the End was one of the biggest songs. And it was at a church convention, this song, and we were all singing it to the girls and everything else. There's nothing like the influence that they had over a lot of guys, and even attempting to have a relationship with music and the girl at the same time. They had a big influence on that. So I'm definitely not gonna not include that as far as being an influence on what we were gonna do over time. And since Michael Bivins was the one who found Boyz II Men, and we actually did the song that Boyz II Men sang in our talent show, I think that lends to the credence of what influence that they had over R&B at the time.
And one boy group that gets talked about a lot, but not a lot of mainstream fans will know about unless you are in an area where it's predominantly Latinx, Menudo. And being from Miami, Menudo was probably played heavily on radio, on TV, and this was pre Ricky Martin joining the group.
Yeah. No, social media was not a thing back then, but word of mouth has always been huge in the music world. And Menudo, I mean, you heard certain girls, certain communities, you would hear them and they would go to the shows. I had no clue where these shows were, but I would hear about the group, and now I would realize they were very popular, but they were also on TV. There was a station at home, Channel 23, WLRN, that did everything in Spanish. I would watch soccer in Spanish just because I watch all sports. And they would be on Channel 23, and I would just pay attention to what they were doing. And they had the pop songs, and they were doing everything that New Edition was, but in Spanish. And they had the girls on lock, and they had it loaded, and they were just a little too early. Just a little too early. If they had come in maybe 10 years later, they would have been the biggest thing ever. Like New Kids on the Block, how they blew up, it would have been that for them. So definitely, one of the influence on groups in the beginning at that time. And I'm sure New Edition probably heard about them too and kind of took some things from them as well.
Right, because when I interviewed Frankie J, he was talking about how the difference between the English language and the Spanish language market at that time, it was that a lot of labels, they weren't looking to cross a Spanish language act over to the English market, because once Selena signed her deal with EMI, they didn't believe she had the potential to do an English record right away. And sadly, her career was cut short right as she was about to make that turn.
It was right there, right on the cusp, and she was a phenomenal singer too. The music that they produced was just so easy to listen to. Between that and Shakira, I listened to Shakira's first album. It was all in Spanish. I was married before, so my wife, we would listen to a lot of music in Spanish. And the thing is, during that time, you didn't know Shakira was going to turn into the Shakira that it became, but you knew she could play guitar and you knew she could do everything. So to see that transformation from where she was to where she is now was pretty dramatic to see. And it definitely, I knew that there should have been some influence in and using both English and Spanish at the same time. I just didn't know how it was going to happen because I heard these songs in Miami growing up, especially the rap songs, Mentirosa. I forget the artist that
Mellow
sang it.
Man Ace.
Element Ace. Okay, so I heard that, and I knew that was going to be one of the songs when people start integrating the music and making sure that it will work. It was going to work, but it's just a matter of people getting out of their heads and saying, "You only do this like this, and you only do that." It doesn't work in music. People like what they like, and it was just great to hear that song and hear it over and over. Ain't got nobody, and they used to incorporate the old samples as well. So it was just one of those things that, over time you knew it was going to happen. You just didn't know when.
Right, because there were a lot of early Latin music acts that I thought should have blown up bigger, but timing just wasn't right. I thought Nestor Velasquez should have
Yeah.
blown up more. He was signed to Uptown briefly, had a record called Personality. Album never came out. I thought Barrio Boys should have been bigger. They were affiliated with Joe Jacket, who came out of New Kids Camp. I definitely thought Bobby Ross Avila should have been bigger as an artist. And then you also had Voices of Theory out of Philly.
Mm-hmm. All those people you just named, I listened to all of them, and the influence that they had on me is just their playing ability, the ability to relate songs to everybody and not put a classification on it. I mean, that's what songwriting is all about. It's not just gearing to this type of person or that type of person. You just want to put your music out and have people hear it and let them judge for what they think it is. And, and I think that's what we at Shy brought to the table. It was just writing good songs. And, If I Ever Fall in Love, everybody didn't like it at first. They might have liked the acapella, but then they liked the music version. Some didn't like the music version, but they liked the acapella, but you had a choice. And that was the beauty of that particular song.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that it was an organic push. Now, was this before Gasoline Alley came into the picture?
That was completely before Gasoline picture, but Carl was already putting a bug in their ear, like, this is going to happen. I'm pushing for it. And Carl was pushing as a producer to do stuff for that company anyway. So that's how they had the end to allowing us to work with them exclusively. And then they worked the deal with MCA. That's how we got the joint venture. And even, this is what people don't know, the entire time that we were out in California while we're working on the record, they were trying to make us work with other producers. And we were like, no, we got this, let us keep working on it because we have songs. And we just didn't have time to work with the other producers because we were doing promotion for If I Ever Fall in Love while doing the record. So we were flying back and forth. And so that's the only reason that we got to produce the entire record. And I think that's kind of what saved us. Heard us later, but it saved us at the time for us to do what we need to do to keep everything in-house.
Right. And you mentioned earlier New Kids on the Block. What was your thoughts when they first blew? Because as we all know, New Kids was created by Maurice Starr, who discovered New Edition, just pretty much took their same formula and applied it to 5 kids from Dorchester who were accidentally stumbled upon by the pop audience and later hit pay dirt.
It's funny because while at Howard, I focused on listening to KYS, HUR, Quiet Storm, and all those kind of things. But something that piqued my interest was PGC just got started and they were playing certain different songs. And I wasn't really listening to a lot of pop music because I was really like ingrained and listening to traditional R&B that I probably missed while I was in Miami. But one of the things that came up was New Kids on the Block. And once I heard those songs, I was like, wow, I was like, this is going to go far. I don't know how far. I think it can go far, but this is going to hit big. And then I saw the visual and I was like, oh, this is through the roof. It's going to work.
Right, because when I listen to I Will Always Be There For You by Anquette, that sounds very similar to Please Don't Go Girl.
Yes, very, very similar. Yeah. And they use those influences, but at the same time, Miami pays attention. And we're gonna put that in there and we're gonna use that. Miami still, even though you have all the rhythms and all the 808 and everything else, Miami's still good for finding a melody. And one thing about good songs, it always has a good melody. And Miami always put that in their music. No doubt about it.
Right. And of course, they blew up like gangbusters. And then in 1991, a multiracial R&B pop group out of Oklahoma came and took the stage and the world by storm with a little song from a little movie by New Jack City. And it was, I think, the number 2 song of the year of 91, Color Me Bad. So what was your
Yeah.
thoughts on Color Me Bad and them exploding with I Want to Sex You Up?
I mean, you're at Howard, so you're listening to all the music that comes in, and every girl on campus was singing, "I wanna," they you just knew the song. So once they came out, I was like, man, everybody's got to compete with that. Wow. And then we met them along the way the next year, and they were working on, I think they were working on their second record or the first record. I can't remember where we were in our careers at that point. But the guys are really cool, and we just met them, and the thing about meeting other groups is like there's a competition in our heads. At the same time, you just want everybody to do well. And because when the one group does well, it promotes another group to do well. And then you're all doing shows together, and then you're competing on the shows. But then the whole show will do better like as we go. So that kind of thing like that is just like
Right. So
make it
there
work.
was never no like, oh, boys is on the bill. Boys is having all the success and it's kind of leaving us out and making us feel like there's no room for us because they are huge with Cool Out Harmony, End of the Road.
Yeah. No, there's competition, but at the same time, you just make it work. As far as your song styles, all groups are still different. So because you're different, you have your lane and you stay in your lane and you make it work, you do your show. But as far as you doing your best show and competing, you just gotta go for it. And once you go for it, the fans react and they will determine everything else.
Now I'm gonna name some 4-man groups, and I want you to give me the difference in vocal stylings between Shy and these groups. So first group, Color Me
Okay.
Bad.
Oh my God. Color Me Bad. Very smooth style. I think we did more minor chords, 7th chords, and that kind of thing. Um, so because of our voices, that's the only thing that made it different. Yeah, they did more major chord stuff.
Jodeci.
Jodeci, their church background allowed for them to be strong and rooted there. We didn't sing with the gospel background like that. Even though we always performed with commission and those type of songs, commission styling was smoother than the gruff of the North Carolina gospel sound that they had. So that's what made us a little different than them.
Portrait.
Portrait, Phil and Irving and all those guys, their voices real smooth. They're so smooth that they just kind of mesh into the track. And the way Mike would produce those songs, their voices just, I used to listen to them sing other Heatwave songs and stuff like that. And it would just be so smooth, but our sound wasn't as smooth because we had Garfield's voice. And Garfield's voice was the difference in us sounding completely like them and us sounding like how we were.
Boys to Men.
Boys to Men. I think because um, Wanya's voice is so strong on top. I think that's what set them apart from us. We never kind of really wanted to have that one voice like that. Darnell would be the closest to the voice sounding like that, being on strong on top. But our voices, it's very comparable actually. When they had the bass as well, because Garfield could do the bass parts. But our voice just meshed differently than theirs, and their style was really smooth, but their song structures were different than us as well. And so by the time they got to the 2 album, their songs are, I guess, more pop affiliated. So they went in a totally left direction than where we went.
All for One.
All for One, oh my God. Those guys, that strong voices. I think because they approached the country song approach. I think that's what put them in the other lane, but their voices were actually the most similar to us. And when we were singing in concert with them, they actually would match up with us guy for guy. They would match up with us the most.
And one more group I want to throw out at you, Silk.
Silk, oof, you talk about five guys that are just dominant and do their thing. And oh man, Lil G is so strong, playing as well as dominating on top. His singer, just power pack. But Lil Jon, his voice is so smooth, and the falsetto. I always appreciate hearing him live shows. And Keith just set their songs in a certain mode that when you did a show with any of them, that you knew that you were going to get a whole show, and their show is totally different than our show. So the voices would sound different. It was just more R&B based than more R&B pop based where we were.
Your thoughts on, I feel, should have had the same amount of success as New Edition. You and I talked about this a lot. I had a chance to interview 3 of the members of this group, along with Chucky Booker, and I'm talking about Troop.
Yeah, Troop. I mean, those guys. I don't know if it was the timing, but they had the songs, but I don't know what that was. But they should have been definitely running R&B for a long time, and they had all the songs, and I don't know what happened. I just don't know.
Yeah, man, Troop, definitely, big. Go to YouTube to check out my throwback interviews with Alan McNeil, Steve Russell, John from Troop, along with Chucky Booker, and also big shouts to Hit Boy, who is Rodney from Troop's nephew. He produced Nas's new album, King's Disease, which just came out yesterday, which is a phenomenal record. So big shout out to Hit Boy. Keep getting the ASCAP checks.
I know that's right. Yeah, so Troop I actually listened to because I was coming off a trip, and one of the guy's sister that I was traveling with, his sister was seeing Dallas Austin at the time, and she had a tape of Troop. All I do is think of you, and so we listened to the entire tape on the trip back from Atlanta all the way back to Howard, and that thing, I mean, we listened to it over and over, and that's just one of the most phenomenal records I heard at the time. And I would soak in all the harmonies. I knew Shy wouldn't sound like that, but I wanted to take in how we approach the harmonies compared to that record. I did use a lot of that in our approach, especially on the Blackface album. I used a lot of like Troop inflection.
Right. And how long did it take you guys to record the If I Ever album? And once Comforter and the title track hit, were you surprised at how fast it took off, both R&B and pop?
To be honest with you, was not surprised at how fast it took off. I knew the songs had everything. The southern element of Carr being from Louisiana and myself being from Florida, and knowing what those songs were going to mean to the people in those environments, we just had to get it to the masses. And then once we got there, the songs, if you're writing towards certain individuals, writing for the ladies, giving them a voice to hear what a guy can write like, I mean, you knew it was going to work. The album was actually recorded maybe 10 weeks total tops, I think. So at that point, like I said, we were in and out. We were always in the studio, or we were out on the road and trying to finish. I think we finished everything right before Christmas, and we were filming the video for Comforter right before the Christmas break. So everything happened really, really lightning quick, fast. And after people saw us on Arsenio, I mean, everything just took off.
Right. And by you guys being based out of DC at Howard, you guys are in the backyard of BET. So I'm sure you guys had easy access to Video Soul and Teen Summit, which Ananda Lewis, who was another HU alum, was hosting. And it was like, hey, slide this to Donnie, or slide this to Sherry, slide this to Alvin Jones, see if we can get on Video Soul or Video Vibrations.
It was weird because actually when we went on Video Soul, we would never have Donnie. Like, I think we only had Donnie once. And Donnie, like, okay, here's the backdoor secret. PGC is the one that developed the song. So because we didn't go through Donnie I think he was at KYS at the time, because we didn't go through Donnie, there was some animosity. It was never discussed, but you could feel it. And it's like, you know, if we had actually had a conversation, that could have been like ironed out. But that's part of the politics of radio stations playing the groups against another radio station, and maybe them not knowing, you know, the politics of like, we have nothing to do with this, but this is how our song broke. So it has nothing personal to do, but you know, we're going to be on video, so can we talk about it?
Right. And
Never got a chance
definitely
to talk
big
about
shout out to Donnie Simpson, who was just named along with Sway,
it. Yeah,
Breakfast Club
Hall of
into the
Fame,
Radio Hall of Fame, class of
Fame.
2020. Go
Well,
to YouTube and also the podcast to listen to my archival interview with Mr. Green Eyes himself. Now, during this time, you guys were out, Boyz II Men was out, but there was a little phenomenon going down in O-Town with a person who is infamous now, Lou Pearlman. He decided to take the vocal stylings of Boys with the look of New Kids and put
yeah.
together a group known as Backstreet Boys. And early on in their careers, they would use your records
Yeah.
as their go-to standards for their beginnings. So what was that like, seeing Backstreet Boys early stages and then them using your songs as their beginning pieces?
I think pretty much, I mean, I feel like anybody that's going to use our music and sing our music, they're paying homage to our style, and knowing that the song was that big, I mean, I wasn't really surprised that they would use that in their shows and that kind of thing, but we never really met them like that. So it wasn't anything personal or that we could take away from it, but you know, hey, I mean, our song was all over the world. So why not? Why wouldn't anybody use our music and just sing it and go for it with it and kind of, you know, take off from there? I mean, that's what was going to happen. And the music industry, you know, is a very interesting kind of place where there was a domination of a lot of Black groups at the time. And so not everybody was a fan of that. You know, not everybody wanted to see a Black group poster in their child's room. I mean,
Josie.
we live in a world where, you know, everybody doesn't like everybody. So, you know, they wanted to make those faces a little bit more familiar and go in a different direction. And that's what the start of that looked like with Backstreet and NSYNC. And no, there's nothing negative I have to say about them, but that's just where the cards lay at the time. And they were going to make money no matter what. And Lil Pearlman was very smart for doing it, actually. So.
Right. And when I interviewed Jeff from 98 Degrees, he mentioned how they were influenced by you all in their early stages. Because if you listen to their debut album on Motown, it was straight up R&B. Because, you know, Andre Harrell was head of Motown at the time. And they had Robin Thicke do some songs on there, Montel Jordan. I think Kenny Green from Intro had did a song or two on that album. Yeah.
Let me tell you, Kenny Green, I mean, that guy, I mean,
may he rest in peace.
Goodness gracious. That guy, he could sing through a building, out the building, over the building, through the building. Just a phenomenal voice. And meeting them on the road, the whole group, that's one of my favorite experiences, because meeting Intro, they were all cool. Every single member, they were cool. We would just hang out, just talk. And most of the time when you're talking to groups, you talk about music. And we would just have late night conversations. And I remember meeting them because I think we were on the Budweiser tour.
Budweiser Superfest.
Budweiser Superfest. And we just met them. We would just talk. We were just talking in the back, and everybody else would be performing. We analyze everybody else's show, and we would just talk about music. And that's what all the groups would do. Even Silk, I mean, I talk to all those guys all the time. We're there sitting there when we're listening to music about H-Town and it was Big G. I was sitting in the room with him. We were just listening to Dino's voice, and Dino's gone too. But it was just a phenomenal time where you could listen to everybody else and enjoy their music. And there's no way we can get that back, but I hope it can be recreated to where the groups can do that again. And I think there are a few groups coming out now where I think it can head that direction. But man, it was a special time. The 90s was a special time in music.
Yeah, Intro's first two albums, the self-titled debut and the New Life album, no skips. Kenny Green was vocally up there in terms of greatness, songwriting. Great, because you got to think about it. Intro was already on doing work behind the scenes with Shinehead, Mary J, and working with Eddie F and David Jam Hall out of the Untouchables camp. So by the time their debut came out, it was highly anticipated, because I just did an interview recently with Kevin Woodley, who was A&R over at Atlantic with when Intro was signed. And I was telling him that, man, their albums, no skips. And then he finally revealed to me what I had been wondering for years. Did Intro do Ain't Nothing Wrong for Real Seduction that was signed to Atlantic? And he said they did.
Oh, for real? I didn't know that.
Because if you listen to that record and then I think maybe Let Me Be the One or Love Thing, very similar.
Very similar.
And I think Real Seduction, they were from New Orleans, I think.
They were, and we met them out here, and we met them early on before they came out, and those cats, they're good too.
Yeah, I thought that they were dope. I thought that Boys of Paradise was dope too. They were signed to Rhythm Safari, which I think was Ice-T's label, and they had remade Shining Star by the Manhattans, and they had a record called Run Around. I thought that they were dope. So if ever, huge. Comforter, huge. Baby, I'm Yours, huge. And then it's time to go back in the studio. Before we get into the Blackface album, you guys go overseas to the UK to tour. And you guys do a little show, which was the American equivalent, the UK equivalent, I should say, to American Bandstand. And that was Top of the Pops. So what was it like going over there and then seeing the rise of the UK groups like Take That, Eternal, E17?
I think Take That was the biggest group when we went over, and I think we did the award show. So coming from where we just left and not having that scene or not being a part of the American scene to do award shows was a huge accomplishment for us, because we had never seen anything like it. And all of a sudden we're thrust on stage with all these groups that are huge, and anybody who's been to the UK, they love their music. So there are so many fans, so many groups, so many back behind the scenes, and we were just part of this big entity. And I don't even know if we knew what we were doing at the time, to be honest with you, but we just knew the song was doing well. So we were just like, okay, let's go on stage and sing the song we always sing, and make sure that we sing it to the best of our abilities, not knowing how big these other groups are, because you still had, I think, all these other groups and stars, and we just didn't even know that it could be that big at that point, because it was way early on, and we're still traveling. I think it was November, right before Thanksgiving, and between doing those shows in the UK and coming back and doing the Bayou Classic, which was one of the great experiences that we've ever had, because we sang with Grambling's band. They played If I Ever, and we sang with them, and we're all tired because we're off a plane coming from Europe and we're still trying to make it work, and oh man, all of that. But going over there and having them have a full appreciation for soul music, for just bands, I think it was Could I Lie to You? Would I Lie to You? Charles and Eddie.
Charles and Eddie, yeah.
Charles and Eddie, yeah. So that was one of the big songs that were over there when we went over there. But to be like put in that above the top class and people loving our music in Europe, it was completely weird, but loving at the same time. And so that gave us more confidence to kind of go back in the studio and put more songs together that have that soul type of feel. So when we come out again, then the whole world could really feel what we want to get across.
Right, because when I interviewed KG from the UK R&B pop group Emanate, they were out in the mid-90s, he had mentioned how a lot of the UK acts, like you stated, revere American R&B and just pretty much just take their own cultural spin and add it. Because if you look at Sam Smith, Adele, Craig David, anybody that's been huge from the UK for the past 3 to 4 decades have all just took American R&B and pop and just put the UK spin on it.
Well, the thing is, they play, it's stations over there where they play nothing but Motown. I mean, that's their staple. They don't even go to like the current stuff. It's mostly Motown, and they blend the other stuff in there. But their go-to is to, Temptation, dun, 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 dun. And they just keep that in their rotation. So when you're listening to that over and over, that's how you have Sam Smith singing the way he's singing, Adele singing the way she's singing, because it's ingrained in them to listen to that style of music, and how it affects their audience is a little different than how it affects here.
Right. And the 90s were not only a good time for the fellas, but it was also a good time for the ladies as well. Female R&B groups were just as top heavy as the guys. SWV, TLC, En Vogue, Jade. The list goes on and all the girl groups that came out during that time. So do you do any tours with TLC, SWV, Jade, En Vogue?
Not TLC, because I think they finished before we got back, before we came out. But we would see Jade on the road doing promotion with them. We were everywhere with them. Every time we would see Jade everywhere. And their songs, we saw them kind of bubbling up. Our song was out, their songs were bubbling, and then we got to the point where Don't Walk Away got big, and they got big. And between them, and then we're on the road with SWV, so we lived with them pretty much the entire time, being on the Superfest. So we got to be good friends with them along the way, and Coco and Taj and Lily and those ladies. Oh man, I love them. Great music, and they're really a lot of fun too.
And I forgot to mention Xscape.
Xscape, yeah. We met Xscape before they came out. So I met Candy. I think we were in a club in Atlanta, and they weren't out yet, but we met her, and I could tell that they had something going on. They were going to work it.
And that they did. And I believe you guys have somewhat of a connection with a group out of New Jersey, which was known for singing in the bathroom in a little movie that is beloved in the African American community called Lean on Me. So tell me the association between Shy and Riff.
The association was Riff was actually on tour with Boyz II Men and Jodeci right before we came out in '91. And Darnell's father was Riff's manager. So we used to have insights of like how to sing on stage, how to react on stage, how to be on stage, and just kind of following them around. I didn't get a chance to follow them around as much as the other guys, but at the same time, I would pay attention to how they were doing and how they were singing. And they were all strong singers. I mean, Kenny, oh man, those guys, they could all sing. They could all blow.
Yeah, I really loved My Heart Was Failing Me, White Man Can't Jump, and the Marlon Marl remix to Every Time My Heart Beats, which I thought was dope. And you mentioned Commission earlier, and when I interviewed Mitchell Jones, and I was telling him about how groups like yourself, Boyz II Men, Jodeci, Intro, was influenced by his group and along with like the Winans. So tell me, what do you think the gospel influence has so heavy on a lot of you guys?
The intricacies of their harmonies. I mean, was it Strange Land was one of the ones that we used to study all the time from Commission. I can't listen in a strange land. Just the way the harmonies would kind of change. We knew we couldn't sing just like that for pop world. But at the same time, how can we have that influence in a song like Comforter, in a song, other songs that we do? How can we have that influence? And I think, I hate to say it, but Sexual has some of those harmonies in them as well, because we can play those layers and kind of influence and bring it into secular music. And those influences, they went a long way. And we used to practice them all the time. And then Lord, I Come. I mean, that was an homage to how we listened to Commission and the Winans all the time. So we used to sing that as a warm-up all the time. And there were actually 2 verses, but we used to cut it because we just couldn't get past a certain point sometimes.
And Take 6.
Oh man, I was pledging when Take 6 came out. So I used to hear it all the time, but I really didn't understand like the intricacies of it.
Spread love.
I was so busy. But once I got off the line and I heard just how you used to play off each other. And of course, there's a McKnight brother in there too. And then meeting Brian right when we got, into the industry. I mean, Brian's so talented, but his brothers were just as talented as well. So you could tell where all that influence came from and just the love of music. And man, that style we wanted to take from it, but we knew we couldn't do all the parts to it all the time. But we wanted to bring what we could to a 4-man group and kind of bring it to Shy and see what happens.
Right, because I definitely felt had the gospel world would have not been so afraid to dive more into R&B, I think Commission would have been huge R&B wise, because listening to Love Is the Way, which was produced by Chucky Booker,
Mhm.
Mitchell, Sean, I can see where Sean from Boyz II Men sounds very similar to him.
Yeah, very, very similar. And Sean has always been silky smooth with his voice and that kind of thing. Before I forget, I was going to say, because during that time, Baby I'm Yours, they wanted a remix. And because you're talking about Take Six, I wanted to talk about just the way the harmonies laid out for Yours, because that's what we created while we're at grad night doing a 3-week kind of thing for every weekend for the high school graduates. They wanted a remix for Yours. And Yours was going to come out a lot like If I Ever Fall in Love came out, because Paco was in Orlando. So we took it to him after we finished the Yours recording, and it was on the radio. It was about to blow up again. The record company ceased and desist on it. They shut it down because they didn't really know what to do with it. And again, we're kind of a little ahead of our time because we're doing a remix to a song that they hadn't really pushed yet. But at the same time, we had a whole different version of a song that could have come out. It was all a cappella, but they didn't know what to do with it at the time. And this is 93. And so the way we did that song was Garfield sang the bass, boom, boom, boom. He sang it all the way down, straight down. And then we did the guitar parts on top of that. And, kind of a string harmony guitar parts, and we did all that second. And the way we laid that song out is it was one of my greatest joys of doing music, I think, because all of it came together in 3 days, and doing the whole song in the studio and finishing, and then having the excitement of it get to the radio station and playing on the radio station, having the Orlando fans react to it. It kind of cut our momentum a little bit to have them stop it. But at the same time, it let us know just how powerful the acapella thing, putting the harmonies together to make it work, and putting the 4 of us in a room and just making it work.
Right, and then I think the big misconception about a lot of R&B groups is that we're only R&B only, but you guys listen to rap as well. So did you guys do any tours of like rap acts as well? And when you did cross paths with like Wu-Tang or whoever, they knew who you guys were?
They knew who we were, and we would just try to hang out. I don't think it was more than that. We weren't trying to be on the shows with them, but we enjoy going to a Roots show and just hanging out and hanging out with Black Thought and just seeing the boys go off. I mean, they were just going on. And that's what music was. You just go support everybody. You go to a show, you go hang out and just talk. And after that, I didn't do the other stuff, but hey, I could definitely go hang out and see what it's all about, because it's going to influence what music you create next. And I think that helped us get to produce a 95, produce different records for the Blackface record. I don't think we produced those records without knowing what the streets were saying as well. And because we come from different places, we're urban societies, from Boston, outside of New Jersey, with influences of New York, Miami, and Louisiana. We had all of that coming from DC as well. We wanted to express all of what we knew about Black culture in our music. And again, I think it was a little too early to really go there, because the record companies didn't want to go there. They couldn't go there with us because they thought we would be offensive. It wasn't meant to be offensive at all. It was just a matter of, we know what our culture is and we know what we want to expose. And if you allow us to go down that path, we can have success together. But they weren't really willing to go that route with us.
Right.
And that's what really hurt us with the Blackface record.
Right. And then, as you and I both know, the way that the industry works is very risk averse. So when you try to do something that's a little bit against the grain and it's not going to be a surefire moneymaker, then they're not going to go for it, which brings to my point where now it's great where artists can just go directly to the consumer, not
Yeah.
really have a label to say, oh, we need a song like this. Oh, we need an album like this. I'm going to make it my way. I'm going to do what I want, when I want it, how I want it, go directly to the consumer and let the fans decide.
Yeah. If you have the support to do it, then you're gonna be successful in today's world. Where you release your songs, it's kind of like the consumer picks what they like the most, and you don't have to worry about picking the wrong single or this or that. They pick what they like, and all you have to do is have the support system and say, okay, I want to do this. I want to be able to do the videos for this. I want to be able to, do it. But back then, we were totally dependent on the record company to support this, do this type of record. Can we do this type of video? Do we have a budget for this and that? Everybody's creating things from their own budgets and what they can do and what relationships they have can go a long way too. Because I scratch your back, they scratch your back, and it was like that back then. But if you didn't have the budget, you couldn't really scratch the same way back in the early '90s. So that held us back a little bit too, because we had to wait for decisions. I
Right.
mean, we were supposed to be on the Friday soundtrack. We were pushing for it to be on the Friday soundtrack, to be one of the groups on the Friday. The record company says no. Why? How is it going to hurt you from your group to be on a soundtrack of a culture, of a movie that's going to be a cultural icon in the future? It didn't make any sense. And that led to the frustration of why Shy is, how can we just do music the same way? We don't want to do 50 records of If I Ever Fall in Love. We're not built that way. We could do one record like that, but not 50 of them. It doesn't make sense. So why not be on the Friday soundtrack? But we're fortunate enough to be on Beverly Hills Cop 3, where Place Where You Belong ended up being on. And we were able to create that, and Carl and Trey built a great foundation, and we were able to lay the vocals on top, and that ended up being one of our bigger songs. But you still feel held back because you're like, I want to be able to do more like this all the time, and we know we can do it, but you're constantly being told, and you can't do this, and you have to be ready to do that, and if you do this for me, then I can do that for you. So it's hard to play that game all the time.
Right. And If I Ever, it was number one R&B, number two pop. Never got to number one on the pop charts because of a ditty by the late great Whitney Houston on a little movie soundtrack called The Bodyguard.
Which was a great song. So I can't be mad at that.
And you can't be mad at Dolly Parton either because she's still getting checks.
Still getting checks to this day, and she loves Black Lives Matter too. So hey,
yeah, I visited her neck of the woods last year in Tennessee. I was surprised at how welcoming it was, and that I wasn't met with "you lost boy" tone. We don't like you around here, but very beautiful. But we're mentioning of ASCAP checks. I was mentioning to you how in the Rough Riders Chronicles, Swiss Beats thought that his checks were all dummy checks until somebody from ASCAP called him and said, how does it feel to be rich? And Swiss went to, I think, the shoebox or the drawer where he put those checks, opened them up, and realized they had $700,000 in ASCAP checks lying around.
I can't even believe that story, because one of the things that we all fight for is publishing. And the way we set it up was that 2 of us would be ASCAP and 2 of us would BMI. And so that way we can share the wealth in both songwriting camps. And those things right there go on forever. And the fact that some people still don't know that these items exist in music is, there's so many jobs that exist in the music world and entertainment just in general. Like, you don't have to be the artist to do everything. You can be a songwriter, producer, working in background scenes, working in studios. I mean, there's so many levels of what we can do in the industry, and it's just not pushed unless you go to Full Sail or schools that have the information about it. And everybody wants to be on TV and that kind of thing, but you don't have to. And nobody knows that until you actually run across people who do different things. And I never ran across it until I moved to LA. So just knowing that these are available and knowing that these checks are available Like, we really have to educate our youth to what is available and what jobs are available, what checks are available. And songwriting is key.
Yep. And don't sign away your publishing. Write a good Christmas record, because if you're able to do that, look at Mariah Carey. She's still eating off of All I Want for Christmas Is You. Now, talk about the impact not only of Prince musically, but of what he's done to make it more favorable for the artist, and being able to say, hey, I want to own my masters. I want to put out stuff my way, myself. And he was doing it in the mid 90s with the MPG website.
Yeah, he Prince was instrumental in asking people or telling artists along the way. He would send messages to people. He always sent messages to us, hey, do you guys own your masters? He would do it all the time through our bodyguard at the time. Big Coco was actually working for him personally as well. So we would always get the messages, and just by him showing a model of how to do independent music and going that route. But of course, like you said, you got to have the budget to do the things that he was doing and distribute and do all that stuff. And I don't know if he knew it would work, but he was like, I'm going to try though. And I'm going to make sure that, you know, he still had the ace in the hole. I can always perform. I could play this guitar on stage and bring a band and people will show up. Everybody isn't fortunate enough to be able to do that. But for him, he definitely showed you the way to say, okay, demand your best, demand your masters, demand this, make sure you have your publishing, make sure you know, own the rights to be on stage, make sure that YouTube is paying you, make sure that all these other people are paying you. When you do your live recordings, make sure you keep it to yourself and distribute it yourself. And he definitely showed different routes of how you can do it.
Right. And Michael was big on that too, even though not a lot of people kind of knew about it. He was very astute in how the business worked. I mean, he brought the Beatles catalog.
Michael's a bad cat. He's a bad cat, and he knew because they would probably try to play him against his brothers and that kind of thing. And that's another thing. I mean, everybody's going to try to play the group against, you know, this person's the lead singer, this person's doing this. Play, you know, you got to stick together and be on one accord, because if you're not, I mean, people will pick you apart just because everybody wants to make a certain type of money. And they always lead you into, well, you can make this money if you do this or if you do X, Y, Z. But we were always up there, we came from Howard, so let's make this money together. And there's a sense of loyalty that we always had. But you have to keep checking in with the group members and make sure everybody's on the same page. And sometimes it's hard to stay on that same page. As you grow older, you get families and that kind of thing. Different pressures come up along the way. So it's hard to stay on that one accord all the time.
Right. And how do you keep that when you have certain members of the group that's doing the bulk of the writing and producing while the others are just singing? And then when they see those ASCAP or BMI checks and say, hey, how come we're only getting this, but you're getting this? And then you have to say, hey, don't get mad at me for doing the bulk of the writing, bulk of the producing, because as we saw with the Go-Go's doc on Showtime, two of the members were the primary writers, so they were getting bigger shares of the money, while the others was just getting the peanuts. And then once Belinda Carlisle went solo, the same members that were the primary writers of the Go-Go's got put on to work on her solo stuff. So how do you kind of keep that group together when the green starts getting involved and somebody's getting more than the other?
It's very tricky. There will be jealousy involved. But at the same time, I think they're entities where everybody serves a purpose and they're doing what they're best at. One of the good things about Garfield, he could act as well. So there are different ways of you making money that you go into different fields. You know, you're doing acting classes, you know, auditions, doing shows. Darnell was very good at establishing relationships with producers and that kind of thing. So he actually is the one that established a relationship with Paul Brown that allowed us to do Warner Brothers Jazz, where we were able to work with Kirk Whalum, Boney James, Rick Braun, and Kirk, you know, and Bob James as well. I mean, so you can't look at it as just, no, I'm not getting a check this way, but how can we get more checks in the future by our relationships that we have with people in the industry who would want to work with us in the future because they like us. That's what the whole industry is about. Do we like Shy? Do we like them? Do we want to work with them? Are they fun to work with? That kind of thing. And that's how you work long term. But if you're not likable, if you're not people don't want to be around you, they're not going to give you that phone call and say, hey, can you do such and such or work with such and such? And when you work on songs, you don't talk about money. You just work on the songs and the music. And then you just try to do the best material available and put it out and then see what happens. Lonely James is one of the most lovable songs that we've ever done. We didn't write it, but those guys made money and we got to sing it. But our songs are playing at the airport. Every airport in the country, they were playing those Warner Brothers jazz songs. So people would call me every so often, be like, I just heard your song at the airport. That's phenomenal. How'd you do that? Well, that was the Warner Brothers connection that, Paul Brown worked on this through this cycle, and that relationship that Darnell had with him. Even though I had a relationship with Paul Brown too, Darnell had a different relationship with Paul Brown that allowed him to call him later on and say, hey, I want you to do this. And actually, Paul wanted Darnell to do a solo project. And Darnell was like, no, I don't want to do a solo project, but I can bring in the group and we could work on this together. So that was always his angle of working and not causing more animosity along the way.
Right. So be professional, don't burn bridges, and don't pull a Lauryn Hill or Erykah Badu and show up 2 to 3 hours late performing on concert, because that's the quickest way to burn a bridge.
That's the quickest way to burn a bridge. You can't show up late. Even in Europe, I mean, oh man, they burned so many bridges in Europe. Europe would book a lot of acts to do shows. We did a lot of shows between 2003 and 2011 in Germany. And they would give you half the money up front. Do you know how many artists would take the money half up front and not show up? Because that money meant that I don't have to pay it back. I'm just going to take this advance. I really don't want to get on the plane. I really don't know if the show in Germany is for real or not, but I don't have to go because now I have the money. And people, the Germany promoters were burnt. And they would ask us every time, are you sure you're going to show up? And, I have the artists, I have this and that. Are you going to show up? I wanted to show up just because I wanted to go over to Europe and have a good time and be in a different audience where they love my music. Why not show up? But other acts didn't always see it like that. And so that made it hard for people to actually, get shows after a while.
Right. And that's where, if you're a novice promoter like that, call up Al Heyman. Al Heyman will get you right. And plus, he'll send you 3 bodyguards to dangle somebody out of a window.
Man, I used to make sure that, he'll tighten you up. Definitely tighten you up. But he'll give you the opportunity to shine on the Superfest too. So don't bite the hand that feeds you. So,
Nope, because they could shortchange you when in that box office counting the receipts. Like, we got this much money. I'm going to slide this here. I'm going to slide that there. I'm going to slide this here. Now, also at the same time, the West Coast was on fire with everything that was coming out of Death Row with Dre and Snoop. Yeah. And then we know once Suge came in, he just kind of brought the street to the boardroom, meaning street way of handling things. And then also at this time, we see Master P and his rise with No Limit, and his deal with Priority is still being talked about to this day, where he got 80-20 split, where he kept 80% of the profit, the label gets 20, and plus, whenever he put out anything straight to video or DVD, he got to keep most of the profits, because he made them about it, funded it himself, sold it at $10 a tape, sold 2 million copies, and he kept all of that. So tell me about the impact of Death Row and No Limit.
Well, the way they had their plan, they were all in-house. I mean, all the products they did all the work. They had all the funding. And when you have the budget, I mean, that's pretty much the ball game right there. You're not asking the label. They got away from the label model per se, and asking somebody else to approve your work. They did all the work and presented it to the label like, here, this is what it is, put it out. And that's a whole different way of approaching the system. And also they knew they had their ear to what people in the streets wanted. So once they produced that music, I mean, they would sample it way beforehand. So they already knew what the public wanted. And once it got out, of course, everybody was buying it and doing, because they already heard what it was anyway. So, it was kind of a built-in entity where it was going to work. And so, again, you're only fortunate enough to be with those entities that have the budget or the setup to do it, and they had it. Now, everybody else who tried that, a lot of people didn't make it.
Mm,
It wasn't going to work because they just didn't have the people in place, they didn't have the promoters in place, they didn't have everything set up. It's a hard business. It's a really hard business
right.
to do and to finish the job. Like, you could have the best product in the world, but if you don't finish the job promotion wise or have it set up in certain places, it's not going to work.
Mm-mm.
So, you have to have these things in place, and when you know when it's go time, it's go time.
Right. And there was this young man who went to Howard briefly and became A&R for the late Andre Harrell at Uptown. And once he got unceremoniously fired from Uptown, started a little label called Bad Boy. I'm talking about Mr. Take That, Let's Get It,
Yeah.
Sean Diddy Combs. So did you ever see him on campus at the time when you were at Howard, or were you there when he brought Biggie to the Howard homecoming when he did Party in BS?
All of that. Puff at the time did a lot of stuff on campus. He had most of the homecoming parties locked down, but actually one of his main hustles was when people needed to get rides home from school to go to the airports and this that. He had a shuttle service that he did for campus. So there were other hustles within the bigger hustle. So when everybody knew he went to New York to go back and work with the record company, we all knew, oh, that's going to work because he's going to make it work. And that's just, it was in his blood to be a part of the system. But I never thought it would get to the point where Bad Boy went, and the label and the artist and just him being the world. He's doing it all. He's doing it all. Did I see that point? No, I didn't see that. But not surprised. Not really. No, because
Mm,
his hustle mentality was always there, and you saw it on campus. Kind of like Kamala Harris. You saw something there, but you just didn't know how it was gonna fester in the future. And you see where it's going now. She's about to be vice president of the United States. So that's what Puffy was at the time on campus. So when it got to Bad Boy, and he brought back people from Howard that he worked with. He brought the producers and everybody else and had people working with them that he trusted from Howard. So at that point, you got Howard people working with you. It's going to work.
right. And then another person from Howard who nobody saw being the phenomenon that he's become now in the acting world, Mr. Chadwick Boseman.
A funny story, actually. My wife actually went on a trip with him to Ghana, and he wasn't supposed to go on the trip, but she encouraged him to go, and they ended up going on this flight over there. She booked his flight and everything, and got him over there. So there's a picture that she has of him, like there's some unique type of trees in the country, and Chad is in the picture, and he's the only one headshot, everything else. And to see these photos now compared to him being T'Challa and the characters from Black Panther, they haven't really seen each other over time, but to have those pictures and see where he's gone from that point, definitely had vision, focus, and he's brought back the Howard Fine Arts program too. It's going to be its own school again and do its own thing like it was when we were there back in the late 80s, early 90s. So it's going to be its own entity again, and all of that's because of him giving back to the school.
Dope. Now I want you to talk about the impact that these guys have had on production. Kyle West, I'll Be Sure, and then Teddy Riley.
Oh man, well, the Teddy story that we have is that we used to go down there and bug Teddy to be a part of his label.
Future Studios, Virginia Beach, right?
Yeah, we used to go down there every weekend before Shy took off, before the summer of that whole winter when I'm studying to graduate from college and everything else, we would go to Virginia Beach and hang out with Teddy. And we met producers Chris and Lenny. Chris Harris, phenomenal guy. He's helped me with my studios over the years, and they gave us tracks, and we met with a whole bunch of other producers at the studio as well. And so, Teddy, we would bug him, but his influence over the industry, the hip hop, the new jack swing. I mean, if you listen to Carl produce a lot of the music, there's a cross section between him doing Babyface and Teddy. So he would take the sounds of Teddy, melodies of Babyface, and that pretty much will mesh into Carl's world of production. So you can see the influence on a lot of the records that we produced on the first two records.
Mm.
Kyle West, I mean, that I'll Be Sure record, again, that was early college for me. But at the same time, just to hear that sound and the influence, you knew certain songs, how it was going to work. And just to hear the ladies' love, the layers of it, the songs. One of the first performers we actually performed with was Al B. Sure when we came back to campus. So we did the Howard Homecoming show. And then the next night we did a show with Al B. Sure. And he was very professional, and he always tried to show us the ropes. He always tried to show the young cats how to work with the mics, and a lot of other stuff that the old cats wouldn't show us, Al B did. And so that's why he's always been successful in the industry. And his layering styles, and Kyle West is underrated to this day. Um, his sounds, how he guides I mean, he sets everything up layer wise in music. He sets it up to where you're going to understand and feel the impact of the emotion, the climax, and then the aftermath and everything else. He sets up a song. And if you study his style, you would definitely be able to have a successful song.
Right, and we definitely got to mention Al B because he brought Devontae in, and Devontae got some early production work on the Private Times, the Whole Nine album, and the Sexy Verses album. And Devontae's bad boy production wise too.
You can hear everything that Kyle West gave him, but then Devontae took it to a whole new level. His level of playing, in addition to the way he brought instrumentation. I mean, Devontae's so wild that a lot of people wouldn't incorporate wild guitar sounds, electric guitar at the time. I think Timbaland did more of that later on, but it's because of Devontae that that sound was included in Black music. Most people they stayed away from electric guitar sounds. They always went acoustic. They always went to the softer sound, not knowing what electric guitar could sound like if you manipulate the sounds and make it work. So I've always admired Devontae's style. Definitely, definitely had big influence. And I love the reaction that people have to his music as well, because they love the grit, the griminess, and just the way he approached it. But one of my favorites he's ever done was the song he did with Montel Jordan, What's On Tonight. I mean, the way he laid it out with the piano, and it was nice and gentle, and he played off of Montel, it gave Montel a different angle than what we knew from before. So I always enjoyed that song when I listened to it.
Your thoughts on everything that was coming out of Atlanta? You know, when Criss Cross exploded with Totally Crossed Out and Jump, they were huge. Escape was huge, launched JD and So So Def. Then you had everything coming out of the Organized Noise camp with Rico Wade, Ray Murray, Sleepy Brown, Outkast, Giddy Mob, then later Ludacris, T.I. And did you expect Atlanta to be the epicenter of urban music, or did you think that it would be a tough sell seeing how biased still music was at the time of things coming out of the South?
Now, quietly, I kind of knew Atlanta had something because we used to go do showcases there. And there was a young act called Kilo. And I had cousins that live in Atlanta, so I would know a lot of the underground artists, or I would at least be able to hear what was going on. In fact, the first time I heard Lottie Dottie was actually in Atlanta through my cousin, Mick Jr. And, they always got the stuff first. They always got to it. V103 was what it was. But over time, Criss Cross, I mean, when we're doing the Top of the Pops in the UK, Criss Cross is there. So we're in the middle of all of that. Plus Jump Jump is at the top of the charts and doing all that and Organized Noise. And one of our people that were around us, Michael Blue Williams, actually became manager for Outkast. So he was one of the first ones to let us know that he was managing Outkast and would send us music and let us know that they were on the up and up, and heard Goody Mob and heard CeeLo early. Who's knocking through the window? We heard all that early. So nothing surprised us about Atlanta and the scene. And again, I heard Dallas Austin do the Troop thing early because I was flowing through Atlanta to go back to Howard. So we already knew Dallas. Dallas had his scene. Organized Noise was there. Wasn't surprised about TLC after that. I mean, the underground Atlanta still to this day. I mean, they have an underground that's, you know, quite comparable to Miami. Miami has this underground scene, and then they would switch and flip flop, and people will go different places and just make it work.
Yeah, we mentioned Atlanta and Miami. I can't be remiss if we don't mention this man who, along with Luke, laid the groundwork for the Southern hip hop movement, and that is J. Prince and Rap-A-Lot Records out of Houston, Texas.
Oh my goodness, yeah. that whole time period and Scarface and that again, another company that set up their own way, did what they wanted to do, made sure that they worked and kept it regional, which means they built the love, they built a fence around that, and it was their love. And they actually had New Orleans at the time. And I think they were able to show New Orleans what to do. And then New Orleans got on the map their way later on. And then, you know, if it wasn't for that company at that time of their period, then I don't think New Orleans gets like that. I'm not sure if Atlanta does the same thing. I'm not sure exactly how that works. And it helped that, you know, Jermaine Dupri actually was with the company in Colombia that believed in him to allow them to do what they were doing. That meant they could get to the funds to do what they were going to do as well. And then ushering in Usher and that kind of thing. So when you have these artists come through there, Beyonce's coming through Houston and going through there, because when they're doing the first two albums, it's not the same as what happens later in their career for Destiny's Child.
And then I think another musical region doesn't get enough mention in the hip hop scene, and that's Memphis with 3 6 Mafia, 8 Ball, MJG. Because we all know Memphis for the roots of R&B and rock and roll with Sun Records, Stax Records, the whole nine. But Memphis plays a big part in hip hop. I mean, 3 6 Mafia won the Oscar for Hustle and Flow.
Yeah. Hustle and Flow just opened up everything as far as what people knew. But before that, the underground scene, Memphis would influence the entire South. Arkansas would get down to Miami, have the influence, but then you could take the sounds, and that created a whole different section of music for a lot of the approach of the rap. And then Juicy J blowing up. I mean, that just took it to a whole new level where he was relatable. People got to understand who he was. And, you know, for pop people to understand 3 6 Mafia through that, I mean, one of my favorite songs to this day is Stay Fly. I mean, all that. Fly, right. fly. I mean, what?
Yeah, my wife and I, we went to Memphis last year, and we were coming out of the Civil Rights Museum, and I saw the arcade restaurant. I told my wife, this is where 3 6 Mafia did the Tear the Club Up video at.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I was super hyped about that. And then we got a chance to go to Al Green's church, and he was there preaching. He was there, and I was trying my hardest not to fan out in the church because, I mean, that is Al Green. The man who I listen to on the radio and on records. I'm 3 feet away from the man, and his voice still clean and as clear as a bell. Now, going back down to Miami, we mentioned Loot Records. But there was another company out of Miami that came out and just took over, and that is Slip and Slide, where you had acts like Trick Daddy, you had Trina, I think JT Money was signed to Slip and Slide, and then to Luke Records at this time was a young guy who is known as Mr. 305 now, but we know him as Pitbull. So tell me about Slip and Slide, and then seeing the rise of Pitbull and also DJ Khaled.
The thing I appreciate about Slip and Slide is that they always included the inner city in their workings. They included the rivalry between the Soul Bowl of Miami Northwestern and Miami Jackson. They included that in their videos, the bands, everything else. So this sound right here brought bands playing music back to high school music, to college, everything else. They brought that back. That was Slip and Slide. Like, everybody might try to attribute it to something else. No, that was them. And they would do the basketball thing, take it to the house and all of that. That was Slip and Slide. And I wasn't home at the time, but every time I would go home, I would see their influence. I would see, and people don't know, Pitbull used to do a totally different rap style. And he would go hard. He would go hard with these Liberty City. He would go hard. And then along the way, people were like, why don't you include this? Why don't you include that? And he started going a different direction, but had success. So the early records of Pitbull were totally different than what it became, into where he became Mr. International, worldwide, that kind of thing. But he's always had success, but it was a matter of what level it was going to be. And yeah, DJ Khaled, that's a whole different thing. Whole
Yeah, he
different
could
thing.
go into motivational speaking if he
That's
wants to. I mean, I got the keys, and then we can't forget Rose. That's who led me to want to try lemon pepper wings from Wingstop, because he mentions them in almost every song that he does, every interview
yeah,
he does. He always has a Wingstop cup. So
yeah,
Miami is still on fire, and for
yeah,
me, I'm
yeah.
glad to see my home state finally get recognition musically, North Carolina, because we've always had talent, from Jodeci to
Mhm,
Anthony Hamilton to
mhm,
Ski
mhm.
Beats, and to see now with what's going on with J. Cole, Rhapsody, the Baby. And I think for a long time, North Carolina always felt we would have to follow what's coming out of New York or Atlanta. Whereas now it's like, hey, it's okay to be us.
To be yourselves, yeah. But I think what's the movie Drumline? Who was the artist that was in that movie? Because he was big at the time.
Nick
Stand
Cannon.
up. No, 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 not Nick. It was the rap artist that came from NC.
Oh, Petey Pablo.
Yeah, Petey Pablo. So when Petey Pablo came out and did his thing, that put North Carolina back on the map as far as like, okay, I'm gonna. And he wasn't shy about saying NC's in the house.
Yeah,
So when that happened, that's when North Carolina was like, oh, we can be ourselves. Okay.
yeah, because my freshman year in high school, Raise Up came out.
Yeah.
Me and all my classmates, we were like, oh, North Carolina. Did he mention my county? No, but close enough, because for a long time before Petey Pablo came out, we were kind of low key claiming Virginia, because with my neck of the woods being so close in driving distance to the
Okay.
Tidewater area, we were claiming Timberland, Neptunes, and Missy. Like,
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
from VA, but we are like, that's the closest thing. But Devontae again had an eye for talent to have
Man,
Missy, Timbo,
he had so much
Tweet,
talent in the
Player, rest in
basement.
peace, Static Major,
How
just that whole basement camp.
how did the basement even keep all of that in for so long? I don't even know.
I don't know.
That's
I
so
heard that Genuine had a totally different album that he did before he left Devontae to go do the Bachelor album. Because when I first heard the Bachelor album, I was like, oh my
yeah,
God, what
yeah,
beat is
yeah,
this?
yeah,
Because Timbaland was coming out with stuff that was unheard of for R&B production at the time.
yeah,
Him
yeah.
and Missy.
He went to work and Missy went to work and she's a stone cold writer. So even to this day, I mean, oh man, the stuff that she's done over the years. I mean, I've always been a big fan of Missy Elliott. So her writing style, her cleverness, her intricacies, her lean to gospel without being over the top. I mean, Missy is that she's bad.
Yeah,
That's
she's a bad woman. And every time I hear Lizzo, she is a descendant of Missy. So it
yeah,
was cool to see Missy in
absolutely.
the Tempo video with Lizzo kind of saying, hey, she studied me and I'm
Yeah,
just pretty much paying it forward. And we can't talk about this man, even though we know everything that's come out since, but you can't deny his musical impact. That guy out of Chicago. You know his name. I'm not going to say it.
definitely had a big influence and definitely had a control over the industry where everybody wanted to copy everything. Um, I never, I never went to one of his shows. I just, for some reason, I just couldn't make it in the venue. But the influence is there. Definitely studied the Isley Brothers and everything else. But man, it's sad to see it go down the path that it went down. I can't say I'm completely in shock that it went down that path. I knew some people that dealt with some things over there, and I didn't know how it was going to pan out. I was hoping that it wouldn't pan out the way that it did, but I can't say that I'm surprised, unfortunately.
Right. Full force in their impact, not only on R&B, but pop, writing All I Have to Give for Backstreet Boys, writing for NSYNC and a lot of those trans connects. Because I believe that they were the ones that kind of gave the groundwork to what Teddy would do later with Keith Sweat and New Jack. They were kind of touching on that with their work with UTFO, Lisa, Nicole Jam,
Yeah,
and their production.
yeah, yeah. Their production is key in the transition of a lot of R&B into the hip hop world. If it wasn't for their production into the songs they were doing with Lisa and Cult Jam, and just how they would use their harmonies, the only problem I think people had was they were so built and so strong that people didn't know what to do with their look. And that's unfortunate because it had nothing to do with the look. If you just listened to what they were doing and what the sound was and how they were singing, how passionate it was, then I think you just get the full picture. But for some reason it didn't translate. And then they did the house party movies. And of course you get, stereotyped at that point. So I think that hurt what they could do visually. But as far as what they do behind the scenes, nah, they're some of the baddest cats in the history of music. They're some of the baddest musicians out there.
Bad. And I want you to talk about LA and Babyface and Jam and Lewis, because those guys, along with Teddy, had a monopoly on R&B and pop music in the mid to late 80s and early 90s.
Jam and Lewis is what I played as a piano player. I studied their notes. I studied their chords. I studied everything about that. LA and Face. I mean, if you want to find a melody, it's going to be LA and Face, and you can find it in 2 seconds. I mean, what they did with Bobby Brown, I heard Larry Blackmon with Bobby Brown, then I heard LA and Face with Bobby Brown, and I like Larry Blackmon with Bobby Brown. But LA and Face with Bobby Brown just took it and raised it so much. I mean, those are the producer duos that influenced all of the 80s and all of the 90s. If you really think about it, they did both decades to the highest level, and nobody could touch either one of them. Nobody.
No. And you got to give Pebbles credit too, as well, for giving LA and Face the idea of set up shop in Atlanta, and then she discovered TLC before Chili came into the picture. They were second nature. It was T-Boz, Left Eye, and a girl named Crystal. Crystal ended up leaving, and then Chili was a dancer for, rest in peace, Damian Dane, that was signed to LaFace, and then that's how she got into the group. And then I just found this out on T.I.'s podcast with T-Boz and Chili. They mentioned that SWV was originally going to call themselves TLC, but Pebbles beat them to the punch for the trademark.
Yeah. And you know what? Both names fit the groups in their own unique perspectives. So I guess we benefited from both.
RAV4. RAV4s. I want to get me a RAV4, $500, and a VCR. So with Boyz II Men, the 2 album, of course, it was not really a big departure in sound, but it was definitely more pop aimed because of the success to End of the Road, and with the reissue to Cooley High Harmony. I felt that was the better album from Boyz, because Dallas just had that hard New Jack Swing vibe, but you could clearly tell with 2 that Motown was like, nope, forget R&B, we're going pop, 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 pop.
I think they just grew up. I don't think at the time we knew that, but I think they grew up to a point where they were ready for that pop level of success. And you got to remember, all these groups were out. How are you going to make it in the industry, and where are you going to sit? And Motown had a vision for where they thought they could be. And you know what? They were right. Because they had to compete with us, they had to compete with Jodeci, they had to compete with all these other groups, and nobody gave Boyz II Men, pretty much after all of us came out again, that respect until those records came out. And then End of the Road, and I mean, they were on the radio forever and just ever. And sometimes I would just hear it and be like, yeah, what are we gonna do?
Right, because I mentioned to you that for the 2 album, Tim and Bob had some songs that they wanted to give the boys, but Gerald Busby told them, I don't want unknown producers doing songs on the biggest pop act in the world. So those songs ended up going on 112's debut album.
Oh, is that what happened?
Yeah, that's so like Can I Touch You, all of the Pleasure and Pain, some of those 112 debut album cuts, they were originally for Boyz II Men.
Oh man, I would like to hear them do those cuts, to see what it sounded like.
Yeah. Now, give me your thoughts on 112 because I think they don't get enough credit, and
Don't get
they
enough.
vocally they were a problem.
Vocally, they are one of the most talented groups I've heard in a long time. Slim is his own entity. He has his own voice. He fits in his own lane because of his unique sound and tenor and how he cuts through on the track. But the other guys, they actually are as talented or more talented than Slim as far as singing. So I don't think they've featured the other guys as much as they should have. And I think that's just Puffy looking at it from a commercial point of view. And I think Slim's voice was relatable to everybody being able to sing. And I think that's what he wanted to get across.
Right. Right. And when I spoke a while back to Brandon Akira from the group Mister, he had mentioned to me that they had a sophomore album all ready to go that Tim and Bob did for him. But
Really?
I think East West was folding at the time or something to that degree. And that album ended up getting canned. But what came from Mister was Bobby V. And that led to his solo career, which was, super huge. And I felt Mister, along with Imagine, very underrated. They came out at a time where R&B groups, young wise, they weren't really a lot out because besides Subway and Soul For Real, there wasn't really a lot of teen-oriented R&B groups in the mid-90s.
No, and also the industry was shutting it down. Like I said, it's one of those things where they didn't want those posters in the room. It's very simple. And I think we got cheated out of a good Mister project. Because I think that would have been one of those projects that really could have gone far. Because we heard them early on in Blackberry Molasses and all of that. And I think it was going to bust. It was really about to just take off and everything just fell apart. And it's a shame because we needed those records to continue the groups to go to a certain level. And it just didn't happen.
Right. So what do you think makes New Edition so special to where they can have success as a group and solo artists where all six had success, were able to come back together as a group, have more success, and then we see now with the miniseries that just came out, they got the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And what do you think makes them special?
I think by them allowing each other to grow. And I think one of the biggest things that happened to them was that BBD was successful. If BBD wasn't successful like they were in their own right, I don't think everything else works just the same because everybody has to respect the entity of I made a hit record, you made a hit record, you made a hit record. And there's respect when you make hit records like that. And because their record went so far and so long and still has one of the most dominating dance tracks ever, I think that was the equalizer that kept New Edition's name being on top.
And New Kids, because New Kids fall in that same category because my wife and I, we went to the mixtape tour and it was nothing but soccer moms and divorcees at that concert, and to still see them be able to sell out shows, moms screaming like they're 13 again. And to think that two groups from Boston would have not only an impact on the R&B side, but the pop side as well. So what makes New Kids special in that same vein as New Edition?
I think because, Jordan just being who he is, and he has so much energy. We met him probably maybe, how long ago was that? Maybe 15 years ago, met Jordan. This is before they did that, they came back together. And Jordan was out just doing whatever. And he's just so energetic and make sure that you want to be around him. So by the time they pulled everything back together, they sometimes you just have magic with that group like that. And there's something that when you get on stage and you're together and you're doing that music and it just works. And there's nothing you can explain. There's no formula for it, but there are certain characteristics with groups that it just works like that.
Right, and same thing with Backstreet and NSYNC, even though Lou Pearlman put together NSYNC to be kind of like a rival group to Backstreet, even though Backstreet was his first group, both groups have that same special quality about them. Even Backstreet is doing their thing, touring and putting out music as a 5-piece, while NSYNC dormant because of JT has gone on to eclipse his group as terms of success, but both of those groups still have that same impact. And I think now to where Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, they're like for the young kids now what New Kids and New Edition were, for me, because I was born like a decade earlier, to where I wasn't really young. I was young when New Edition, New Kids were in their heyday.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there was a day when NSYNC could actually do something like how New Kids is doing it, and then I think that would be a happy day for a lot of people.
Justin would probably do a Bobby Brown set from Home Again. I get to do maybe 2 hours of my stuff, maybe get a little extra on the top. And I just think with groups, do you think because of social media now that and everybody's all me focused that we'll see groups again? I mean, we have in real life, we have CNCO, but any groups that would have that same impact like you guys, Boyz II Men, New Edition, New Kids, Backstreet, NSYNC?
So I think it's just everything goes in cycles, and it's just a matter of time before somebody can actually formulate it for the social media world that we live in now. I just think they haven't figured out or taken the time to figure out how to do it. And I know people have put groups together and try to do it and that kind of thing. It's just really hard. And again, you have to be totally committed to 3, 4, 5 other people that are in the group with you. And sometimes that's really hard for people to realize. And everybody, as a solo artist, sometimes they feel like I want to make sure that I do what I want to do. And as a member of a group, that doesn't work.
Right. Now, when you guys did the Baby I'm Yours video, you guys went back to Howard and shot it. Who idea was it to shoot it at Howard? And who do you remember who directed the video?
All 4 of us, and I can't remember his name. Was it Ward? Last name Ward was the director. But all of us pushed for that. We knew because the song had a poppy feel to it. And trust me, we went through so many versions of that song to get it. And to this day, I don't think everybody's still happy about the version that actually ended up being the version. But because we went to Howard, it put a different spin on it visually, that the song could take off and be, well in its own right. And all 4 of us knew the power of going back to school and doing the visual on campus and doing trailblazing work where you can show off your campus and it's kind of recruiting. We're recruiting for that point and making sure that people saw our campus and how beautiful it was and showcasing that you can do good things and you can do music industry, you could do this, you could do anything and still bring it back to where you started.
Yeah.
That's what we want to relate.
Yeah, Ananda Lewis was in the video, and then one thing that I found cool in the video was that Carl, he was wearing a Naughty by Nature, I think, hoodie, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool that he was on the low promoting Naughty wear, Absolutely. With the Naughty by Nature logo, and that just goes to show the cross-pollination with, R&B going into hip-hop and vice versa, because if you think about before what Puff was doing at Bad Boy and kind of like Uptown as well, merging hip-hop and R&B, seeing Meth and Mary J, Lil' Kim, Mary J, and just how now it's ubiquitous where you have Drake collaborating with an R&B act, whereas back then it was still like, you remember the old Reese's peanut butter cup commercials where you had the chocolate bar here and the peanut butter here? It was like this, rap and hip hop. But as soon as they met, this tastes pretty good.
But we came from a world where we were listening to the same stuff that everybody else was. So we tried to incorporate that in our live shows as well. There would always be, with the live band, we would do sections of Jump Jump and do House of Pain, and we would just have everybody going crazy because we wanted to integrate that. And then a lot of times on promotional tours, we were on tour with Naughty as well. So we would see them all the time. So we were breaking bread with everybody, and that's kind of how it was. And we were in New York, we go hang out with them. If not, eventually we had management from Naughty's people, Queen Latifah and Shakim. They were our managers for a while.
Flavor Unit
was our manager. So, you know, we dealt with a whole bunch of different people along the way, and you know, you make it work.
Rest in peace, Apache. He was Flavor Unit affiliated. And speaking of Naughty, I'm sure they were loving them nice little residual checks when Don Cornelius hit them up to do the Soul Train thing. So
Oh
what
my
was it
God.
like with you guys shooting Soul Train and interacting with the late great Don Cornelius? Because I've heard stories from former dancers that I've told you that he was a tough cookie and no one to mess with.
No one to mess with, and we saw Don maybe one or two times. We didn't see him that much because actually, I think who was hosting the show? I think Stacy was hosting the show, Stacy Dash, and I think Shamar was hosting the show as well. So we saw them a little bit more, but we saw Don backstage, and of course he'd come back with his deep voice. How you guys doing? Okay, I really love your songs. And so he just got that little bit real quick. But his presence was everything. And we were honored to do the shows because we actually won the Soul Train Music Award as well, I think for new artists as well. And that's one of the something that we always cherish because we didn't know if that was going to be possible the year before because we were barely put together, and to win it the next year, I mean, you never really saw that coming, but you're like, wow, we did it that fast. And between that and the Image Awards, it lets you know you put in some work and you're going to get something out of it. But during the act and seeing how it was growing up and looking at it a certain way and going to the studio and seeing how hard the dancers work very hard.
And as we all know, because of American Soul, dancers weren't paid. You got a 2-3 piece KFC box, and if you were able to get gigs outside of that, do it. But don't tell Don. But Don had an eye for talent as well because him and Dick Griffey put together Solar Records, which in turn put together Shalimar, which featured Jeffrey Daniels and Jody Watley, who were dancers on the show. And later, Howard Hewitt came into the group after one of the original singers left. And Howard Hewitt ended up doing the Soul Train theme from 87 to 93, which was composed by George Duke, which his stuff, George Duke's stuff, sound very similar to Parliament. And also George Duke brought Sheila E. into the game before she hooked up with Prince.
Is that right? Oh,
yeah. George Duke brought Sheila E. in playing bongos and stuff before she went to go to Minneapolis to get purified in the waters of Lake Minnetonka.
And thank goodness for that, because that period with Sheila E. and Prince, that's a genuine great period in music, and there was nothing like that. And then I just heard the original version of Glamorous Life before then, and I was like, what it transformed to with her and the Tamales.
Yeah, it sounded like you could tell it was a rough cut, a rough demo, because it didn't have that extra punch, and the timbales added that extra punch. And then this is how strong the Minneapolis sound was in the mid '80s. You had Ready for the World out of Flint. Taking what was coming out of Minneapolis with Oh Sheila, the Jets with Curiosity. They were from Minneapolis, but it had that Prince erotic city sound. It was pretty much everything that was coming out of there was white hot, whether it was Prince, whether it was Alexander O'Neal, Sherelle, Janet with Control. And it was just a happening spot where even the Human League had to go see Jammin' Lewis.
Yeah, they had to. But you know who's mad at Ready for the World?
Who?
Dream Boy.
Oh, I just found out about them like not too long ago because they were good. I mean, I just want to know your name. And I think what kind of hurt them was they didn't get that cosign from the Electrifying Mojo out of JLB in Detroit that Ready for the World did.
No, that's that one thing. That's what hurt them.
Yeah, because they were signed to Quest. They were signed to Quincy's label. And I'm like, when you got the backing of Quincy, you thought you were good, but like you said, that one big cosign from, and that just goes to show how back then, radio DJs, depending on your region and how big you were, you could make or break records and acts.
Yeah, I mean, that thing right there. I mean, we met, come to think of it, Detroit, we met UMV. We did a show with them right before they got signed, I think. and they sang all their songs and that kind of thing. And they're a really good group too.
And they were
Really,
signed to Maverick Head. Something's going
yeah,
on. They
yeah,
were
yeah,
dope. I thought
yeah.
Coming of Age group out of Cali was dope.
Mhm.
TQ, who later signed to
Yeah,
Cash Money, put out West Side,
yeah.
was in that group. And the Bay Area. I can't be remiss if we don't talk about the Bay. I mean, the Bay in terms of music. You
Oh
know,
my.
you had Sly and the Family Stone,
Mhm.
Larry Graham.
Mhm.
I think Confunctions from out the Bay.
Tower of Power.
Tower Power, Two
Yeah,
Shorts out the Bay,
yeah.
E40, Club Nouveau, MC Hammer, Tony,
Tony.
Loonies. So what do you think is some in the water in the Bay Area that produce all these great talents?
I just think that environment, the way they work, and I think their musicianship up there, because I listen to a lot of now the San Francisco Jazz Ensemble, and they just, you know, it's so calm and just inviting, and but they're really serious about the musicianship. And I think that competition factor for what they want to do, I think that comes out in the Bay Area a lot, where it's just different in LA than it is there. And I think because you have classic acts from those eras, from the older generation. Oh, New Birth too, from up there. So because you have all those classic acts that did well, you want to do as well or better and incorporate your sounds from them. And Sheila E's influence on the Latin influence in that environment. I mean, it's just crazy. Crazy.
Yeah,
Bay Area is crazy. But I love going to that area just so I can hear something different.
yeah, and we definitely got to shout out Jordan Peele because a new generation now know what I Got Five on it means.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when I first saw the trailer for Us and when I heard I Got Five on it, which samples Why You Treat Me So Bad by Club
Yes.
Nouveau, by the way, I was
Yeah.
like, I'm sold. You can have my money. I'm going to go see it just because he put the loonies in there alone. And
Right.
now I think that with Houston, you mentioned Jay Prince and you mentioned Beyonce, to see her being that cultural force to where she put out a movie on Disney Plus where promoting her blackness. Did you think that seeing her from Destiny's Child to where she is now being the brand that she is, what made her the one to say, hey, she got it?
I think everybody always knew that she was the one, but they didn't know how to manifest it early on. She was definitely the one that worked the hardest, the one that they all worked hard. Don't get me wrong, but she was the one that was going to be the one out of that group to make it go that far.
And then we've seen Moesha get reissued onto Netflix. So a new
Is that right?
generation is discovering Brandy and her braids. Now, Brandy, huge success, R&B pop across the board. Monica, just as successful. And when they put together The Boy's Mind, Dallas Austin, he did an interview on DJ Vlad, said that Monica and Brandy weren't really feeling each other. And then Monica had to show Brandy before the VMAs that she was from the A.
Right, right. And that's just one of those things. Again, the competition, it just takes over. And, you know, you get near a stage or on that stage and you got that mic in your hand. And, you know, I got to show everybody what I'm about. And you only have one opportunity to do that. And if you don't do it, everybody's going to talk about you real bad. So you got to make it count. And Monica was like, I'm going to make it count because people think I don't have it and I have it. And this is what Whitney was talking about.
Few more things that I want to get you on out of here. What was it like performing on Showtime at the Apollo?
We did the Apollo, but we did a feature on the Apollo where we actually did the Zoot Suit performance. And that was actually, I felt like I was in a special place that was historic and in the middle of Harlem. And once you go down to that stage and put it on there, there's nothing like it. I mean, you just go down there. Apollo is unique in itself, but to be there performing and feel the energy from the Harlem Renaissance, I mean, there's nothing like it. And again, we have a lot of things that I remember from our past, and there's special things that happen, and that's one of the most special moments.
doing Arsenio, because you got to think about it. Arsenio at this time was huge, and I was surprised Fox then snatch him up and say, "Hey, we're going to put you on exclusive with us instead of being syndicated across the country." Because you
Yeah.
got to think about it, people. For those of you that are too young to remember Arsenio, this was at a time when late night talk shows didn't really feature urban acts
Not at
performing.
all.
It was pretty much pop or rock only. Some
Yeah.
rap here and there, but Arsenio was blackity black, 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 and unapologetic about it.
Yeah. And he was so kind to us, and he treated the artists like they were people. And I'm not sure that everybody always knew that about his staff and the show itself, but they went above and beyond treating the artists like first class, everything, everything, just how they treated it. And for us to be on that show after looking at it, from being in DC to showing up in LA and at the last minute being added just so we could sit on the set and show people for the first time who we were. I mean, that was a unique experience for us. And we actually got to, we got to fly our moms out. So our moms were in the audience, like the four moms were in LA together. And we're all sharing this moment, and people at home are getting to watch us at the same time. So there's a classic moment with Arsenio that nobody else could experience but us.
Mm. And do you still dabble in music? And do you think that if we'll ever see a track with you guys? Because I'm sure you get asked this all the time and often.
I get asked all the time, and that's pretty much normal the way it operates. I always work on stuff, but I haven't been able to put it to the right thing. And being in the middle of pandemic and the elections and stuff like that, music can't just be average right now. I think it should be special, and it should have some meaning towards something. You just can't put out any type of track right now unless you're somebody who's at the top of the charts, But as far as what we do, I mean, I don't write anything off, but at the same time, it just has to make sense.
All right. All right. Fair enough. Last thing, your thoughts on Kirk Franklin and with him taking what James Cleveland before him, what Andre Crouch, and meshing the secular and the sanctified into being a huge success to where he is now.
I have no problem with it. I mean, there's some music that can't be exposed unless you have a current or more current form that exposes the roots of gospel. And I think him being able to do it and doing it in such a way where it's accessible. I mean, just think about it. He has Sirius Channel on his own. He plays whatever music he wants. He has gospel artists doing their own shows on there. I mean, that opens up a window for people to do stuff that in gospel they couldn't do before or be exposed to. And, back in the 90s, there was no route like that. It was amazing that people knew Commission and the Winans, but they did because of word of mouth, because it was powerful in the community. But now you get this gospel channel to play your song. That's a whole different realm. And Kirk Franklin, by his relationships, opens that door up.
Right, because I remember Stomp being played on MTV, and with Revolution, he had Rodney Jerkins do the track, and Rodney Jerkins is another producer that doesn't get enough credit. So shout out to Rodney Jerkins, shout out to Warren Baby Dub, shout out to Donald Lawrence, shout out Clark Sisters, and thank God for that Lifetime movie, because everybody got to see how vocally the Clark Sisters influenced SWV, Escape, and pretty much any female R&B group of the 90s were vocally influenced by the Clark Sisters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that people get exposed to all the singers that they think they know. And then you hear the stories about what stuff that people have gone through. And then you look at life a little bit different. Because everybody thinks everything's easy once you get to a certain point, and it's not. You have to keep working hard at it, and you have to make everything count. And the thing is, once you get on that stage, like I said, you gotta show what you're about. If not, people write you off, or they say, "Oh, it was all right." You never want anybody to say it was just all right.
Nope. So treat it like you're on stage amateur night at Showtime at the Apollo. Well, I did, and Sandman came out, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. So do you have any shout outs you want to give before we conclude the podcast and give out your social?
I think for me, I just want to shout out my mom because she's always stepped by me no matter what. Being in this industry, she always thought I was going to go into some different industries and that kind of thing, but she's always stepped by me, and she's one of my best friends in the world. And my family and everybody who's just gotten through me and helped me get through the pandemic. I've been dealing with diabetes type 2 for the last, 5 years or so. So I've been controlling that a little bit. So anybody who needs help with that, just hit me up. No problem. I'll elaborate on how to get through everything. And I'm so grateful for my wife, my daughter, my son, and they're the rocks of my life and keep me going.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this interview, along with the video portion, will be available on Anchor, Breaker, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Apple Podcasts, and also YouTube on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/J5. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, Mark Gay from the R&B group Shy. Mark, thank you very much for coming on to the podcast, bro.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime, Jay. I really appreciate you taking the time with me today.
No problem.